Chapter 2608. Liang Palace. The moment Xiao He made her move, the surroundings fell silent. Whether it was the cultivators guarding this camp or the cultivators who were planning to leave the heaven realm of Huaxia, they all looked at the Xiao He dog who was sitting on the hilt of a black sword on the space-time wheel in surprise. As for Zhuowen and the green-haired mummy on the space-time roulette, they were ignored by these people. After all, Xiao He had stolen all the limelight back then. "How dare you kill my Liang Palace's people?" A guard shouted angrily. Immediately, the dozens of cultivators guarding the entrance took out their respective divine artifacts and attacked the space-time roulette. Many of the surrounding cultivators shook their heads. They felt that the owner of the time-space roulette was too reckless. He actually attacked without any reason. Wasn't this clearly going against Sunrise Palace? Liang Palace was a first-rate power in China's heaven domain. It was said that Liang Palace had a peak void sky 8th step expert overseeing it. Apart from those hegemonic powers in China's heaven domain's Tai Ching immortal realm, there really wasn't any other power that could contend against Liang Palace. Just as the onlookers were shaking their heads and sighing, the dozens of guards who had rushed over let out endless screams. They were all sent flying and many of them died on the spot. So powerful! Everyone looked at Xiao He, who was still sitting on the sword hilt, in disbelief and awe. They knew that Li Yanggong had kicked an iron plate. This Xiao He dog was not simple. After all, those dozens of guards were all void sky experts, yet they were defeated so easily. Clearly, this Xiao He dog's strength far surpassed those guards. What happened? A dignified voice was transmitted over. Immediately, a middle-aged man rushed out from the cave that was hidden in the darkness beside the entrance. He looked at the Xiao He dog on the space-time roulette and cupped his fists. "Brother, may I know who you are? Why did he attack without distinguishing between right and wrong? You must know that we are from Liang Palace." Xiao He looked at the middle-aged man with disdain and sneered, "What is Liang Palace? I don't even care about the Taoda Hall. Is your Liang Palace stronger than the Taoda Hall?" Everyone was in an uproar. They looked at Xiao He as if they were looking at an idiot. The Taoda Palace was recognized as the #1 power in Huaxia Heaven Domain because the Lord of Heaven Domain was the founder of the Taoda Palace. Xiao He naturally did not care about what these people thought. In his opinion, although Tai Ching was strong, Yuan was not weak either. Even if he faced Tai Ching head-on, Yuan was not afraid. Moreover, Yuan had told him that the Grand Pure One had already left the 8 heavens. No matter how arrogant he was, the Grand Pure One wouldn't cause trouble for him. Arrogant bastard. The middle-aged man was unable to restrain his anger and attacked. Unfortunately, Xiao He only slashed out once and the middle-aged man's right hand exploded into a bloody mist. The middle-aged man grunted and retreated. He looked at Xiao He in shock. His forehead was covered in cold sweat. He knew that he had encountered a tough opponent. "Scram, I want to leave Huaxia Heaven Domain. Your Liang Palace has no right to stop me," Xiao He said coldly. The middle-aged man fell silent. He immediately stepped aside and lowered his head. He did not dare to refute Xiao He. The middle-aged man was no fool. After knowing that Xiao He's strength was so terrifying, he knew that if he continued to block in front, he would only lose his life. Xiao He raised his head arrogantly and drove the space-time roulette towards the exit. Zhuan looked at Xiao He's arrogant expression and found it funny. He knew that this guy's personality had not changed at all. "Xiao He, stop first," Zhuowen suddenly exclaimed. Just as Xiao He was about to drive the space-time roulette into the exit, Duan spoke. "What's wrong?" Xiao He stopped the space-time roulette and looked at Zhuowen in confusion. At this moment, Zhuowen's eyes revealed a hint of joy. He took out 2 keys from his spiritual ring. The 2 keys were black and white. They were simple and unadorned. The space-time rules lingered around them. The green-haired mummy looked at the 2 keys that Zhuan took out and exclaimed. His eyes revealed a look of interest. The 2 black and white keys floated in the air and trembled. Finally, they both pointed in a certain direction. It was as if there was something in that direction that attracted the 2 keys. Zhuan was excited. He knew that the only thing that could make the 2 keys behave strangely was the 3rd key. Zhuan looked in the direction that the two keys were pointing in. That direction happened to be where the crowd of onlookers was. Zhuan looked at the crowd of onlookers and instantly locked onto a sneaky figure. This sneaky figure also noticed Zhuan's gaze. Like a bird startled by the twang of a bow, he immediately dove into the crowd and quickly fled. The direction that this person was fleeing in was the exit of the Huaxia heavenly domain. Since Zhuan knew that the two keys were acting strangely because of this person, he naturally would not let this person escape so easily. Therefore, he immediately stretched out his right hand. The invisible hand formed by divine power was extremely fast. In an instant, it fell on the top of that person's head and then slammed down. A pained cry rang out, and the sneaky figure was immediately slapped to the ground by the giant hand made of divine power. This person was wearing a thick black coat and a large black hat on his head. There were traces of God-forbidding restrictions on his body. Obviously, he was hiding from something. Zhuan took a step forward and landed in front of this person. With a flick of his finger, the person's black coat and hat were all torn to pieces. The God-forbidding restrictions that surrounded the person's body were also destroyed by Zhuan. When he saw the person's true appearance, Zhuan was stunned. This was because the person in front of him was actually a little girl who was no more than 12 years old. This little girl's eyes were misty. She looked at Zhuan with grievance. Her expression was enough to soften the heart of a man with a strong heart. However, Zhuan's gaze was cold. He could feel that this little girl's true age was at least older than him. Her cultivation was also in the virtual sky world. She was probably at the 3rd level of the virtual sky world. Zhuan put away the 2 time and space keys. His powerful divine sense scanned the little girl's body from head to toe. However, his brows were tightly knitted. He did feel the aura of the time and space key on this little girl, but he did not find any trace of the time and space key on this little girl. With Zhuan's current powerful divine sense, it was not difficult for him to quietly enter the little girl's spirit ring and investigate the things in her spirit ring. However, the result of Zhuan's investigation was extremely disappointing. However, Zhuan was sure of one thing. Since this little girl had the aura of the time and space key, she must have come into contact with the 3rd time and space key. She might even know the whereabouts of the 3rd time and space key. Chapter 2609. Sure, family, you should recognize the 2 keys I took out just now, right? Zhuan said indifferently. The little lowly's pupils shrank as she turned her head and said, I don't recognize them. Little girl, if I wanted to kill you, it would be as simple as moving a finger. I think it's best if you don't show your stubbornness in front of me. Otherwise, I will lose my patience. Zhuan's voice was indifferent as he looked at the little lowly with eyes full of killing intent. An invisible pressure was released and pressed down on the little lowly, causing her delicate body to sway. Sure, family's remnant, you really are here. You really hid yourself well. It seems like we didn't have to put in any effort to find you. Suddenly, the middle-aged man from Liang Palace looked at the little lowly with a happy expression. However, the middle-aged man didn't lose his mind because of this. Instead, he respectfully came before Zhuan and cupped his fists. Senior, this person is a wanted criminal of our Liang Palace. We are guarding this place for this person. I hope that Senior can give this person to us for the sake of Liang Palace. I represent Liang Palace to thank you. Although the middle-aged man had never seen the white-clothed youth in front of him fight, he could tell that the white-clothed youth wasn't simple from Xiao Hei's attitude. Therefore, the middle-aged man didn't dare to show the slightest disrespect to this person. What is Liang Palace? Is it worth me giving you face? Zhuan indifferently turned his head and looked at the middle-aged man. A wave of killing intent burst out like a sharp sword and suddenly shot out. Puchi. The middle-aged man's eyes were filled with shock as he spat out a mouthful of blood and was sent flying. He heavily smashed into the ground and his body twitched. He could only struggle on the ground. Everyone was in an uproar. Just the killing intent released was enough to seriously injure a Void Sky 7th-step expert like the middle-aged man. Just how strong was this person? Even a Void Sky 8th-step expert couldn't do this. The little lowly looked at the middle-aged man who was seriously injured by Zhuan and then looked at Zhuan. Her beautiful eyes revealed a trace of light. You should know about the space-time key, right? Zhuan didn't even look at the middle-aged man. Instead, he turned his head and looked at the little lowly seriously. The little lowly Xiaohei rolled her eyes and said in a clear voice, I do know about the space-time key, and its color is different from yours. The one I saw was red, but if you want to get the space-time key, you have to promise me one thing. Zhuan furrowed his brows. Although he was much stronger than this little lowly, Zhuan really couldn't bring himself to take the initiative to snatch something from the weak. After all, this was already a matter of principle. Zhuan believed in the principle of not offending others if others did not offend him. Therefore, he could not be as ruthless as other cultivators and take things by force. As long as I can do it, I will promise you. Zhuan nodded. The little lowly's beautiful eyes lit up as she let out a sigh of relief. She knew very well that the stronger an expert was, the less they valued life. Killing and seizing was a common thing for them. She said those words because she felt that this white-clothed youth was different from other experts. This white-clothed youth didn't have the feeling of indifference to life. My condition is to help me kill the young palace master of Sunrise Palace and rescue the Sher clan members captured by Sunrise Palace. The little lowly's beautiful eyes revealed a trace of hatred. After saying that, the little lowly looked at Zhuowen with some apprehension. The little lowly had always known that Liang Palace was very powerful. She had sought help from many experts, but because Liang Palace was too powerful, no one dared to agree to his conditions. Some experts even attacked her in order to curry favor with Sunrise Palace. If it wasn't for her good escape methods, she would have been a prisoner of Sunrise Palace by now. Although this white-clothed youth looked very strong, Sunrise Palace wasn't just one person, but a huge force. In the little lowly's view, this white-clothed youth's cultivation was at most at the 8th step of the void sky, while the ancestor of Sunrise Palace was at the peak of the 8th step. She was afraid that this white-clothed youth would choose to retreat after hearing about Sunrise Palace's prestige. However, to the little lowly's surprise, the white-clothed young man before her just nodded and said, Oh, that's easy. Take me to Liang Palace. After I'm done with these things for you, you should hand over the space-time key to me. You are not afraid of Sunrise Palace? The little lowly asked in surprise. Zhuan slightly frowned and lightly said, Why should I be afraid of Sunrise Palace? Does Sunrise Palace have a Tao vindication expert? The little lowly awkwardly smiled, but she didn't believe Zhuan in her heart. She felt that Zhuan was bragging. However, she had gone out this time to find an elite to save her clansmen. Now that she had finally found Zhuowen, someone who was willing to help her, she couldn't refute him even though she knew that he was blowing his own trumpet. Otherwise, it would be terrible if she ruined his interest. You know the location of Sunrise Palace, right? Zhuowen asked indifferently. I know. The little lowly nodded and said, Then sit on my flying divine tool. Zhuowen didn't allow her to explain. He lifted the little lowly by the back of her collar and placed her on the space-time roulette. He also sat cross-legged on the deck of the space-time roulette. Little girl, you really lost out. Using a space-time key in exchange for this brat going to Sunrise Palace to save your clan members, and only killing a young palace lord. You have to know that this brat can destroy Sunrise Palace as easily as blowing off dust. After the little lowly was placed on the deck by Zhuan, Xiaohei quickly came closer and said with a smile. The little lowly forced a smile. She felt that these people were crazy. Sunrise Palace was a first-rate force in the Huaxia domain, but in their words, it was like a cat or a dog that could be easily dealt with. Xiaohei, you talk too much. Hurry up and drive the space-time roulette. Zhuowen's voice sounded. Xiaohei shrugged and drove the space-time roulette away from the exit of the Huaxia domain, following the little lowly's instructions. Sunrise Palace was located in the southern part of the Huaxia domain, occupying 40% of the southern territory. It could be said that it was the largest force in the southern part of the Huaxia domain. On the way to Sunrise Palace, Zhuowen and the little lowly didn't talk much. However, the little lowly and Xiaohei talked a lot. During this time, the Purple Star Sovereign also came out of seclusion. Zhuowen knew that the Purple Star Sovereign should have succeeded in his cultivation. In the future, the Purple Star Sovereign would embark on the path of cultivation of the sorcerer tribe. At the same time, from the conversation between the little Loli and Xiaohei, Yuan also found out that the little Loli's name was Sherdai. She was the second daughter of the Shi family. The Shi family was also a force in the southern part of the Huaxia domain. However, compared to a colossus like Sunrise Palace, the difference was not small. Originally, the Shi family and Sunrise Palace didn't have any grudges. However, one day, Sunrise Palace suddenly surrounded the Shi family and captured all the Shi family members. Later, the Shi family found out that the young palace master of Sunrise Palace had taken a fancy to the Shi family's eldest daughter. This was because the eldest daughter didn't like the young palace master of Sunrise Palace and rejected him. The young palace master flew into a rage out of humiliation and sent experts from Sunrise Palace to surround the Shi family and capture all the Shi family members. Chapter 2610. Attacking Liang Palace. We'll be arriving at Liang Palace soon. Alright, it's best if we disguise ourselves and sneak into Liang Palace. This is the safest way. Sherdai stood up and looked at the starry sky in front of her. In the distant starry sky, she could vaguely see a vast continent floating in the starry sky. This continent was very large and boundless. There were many dazzling palaces inside. Zhuowen's divine sense had already detected this continent from far away. This continent was definitely the largest one Zhuowen had ever seen. It could be seen that this continent wasn't naturally formed, but rather pieced together by many meteorites and boulders. This Liang Palace is really extravagant. They actually spent so much effort to piece together such a large continent. Zhuowen narrowed his eyes. He was very clear that even cultivators would need to spend a lot of manpower and wealth to piece together such a large continent. Senior, what are you doing? Why are you directly rushing towards the core area of Liang Palace? Sherdai originally wanted to persuade Zhuowen to first land on the continent, then disguise himself and slowly sneak into Liang Palace. Sherdai's main goal was to save the Shi clan members. As for killing the young palace lord, that was only secondary. However, she didn't expect that Zhuowen would immediately rush towards the core area of Liang Palace like a suicide mission. That place was an important location of Liang Palace. It was the residence of the important figures of Liang Palace. There were as many experts as the clouds and it was heavily guarded. Even an expert at the peak of the 8th step of the Void Sky realm would die if they tried to force their way in. Moreover, in Sherdai's eyes, this one was only an 8th step Void Heaven cultivator. Rushing in like this was the same as courting death. Little miss, don't worry. Although I know you're worried about the cultivators of Liang Palace, don't worry. This brat Zhuowen knows his limits. Xiaohei controlled the space-time roulette and smiled at Sherdai. Sherdai was dumbfounded. What was going on? She was worried about them. How could this Xiaohei invert right and wrong? Moreover, Sherdai couldn't understand why these people were so confident. Previously, she thought they were just boasting. She didn't expect that they would really try to force their way into Liang Palace. At this moment, Sherdai was so anxious that she was about to cry. She knew that once Zhuowen's group rushed into Liang Palace, they would die without a doubt. Not only would her Shi clan members not be able to save them, but her life as well. You bunch of lunatics, put me down. I'm not going to die with you, Sherdai hurriedly said. At this moment, Zhuowen had no time to care about the crying Sherdai. With a wave of his sleeve, a powerful divine power immediately imprisoned Sherdai. Liang Palace, Liang Palace, Liang Palaces, help Liang Palace. Liang Palace, Liang Palace. At this moment, at the core of the continent, palaces stood in great numbers. They were dazzling with gold and jade. In this core area, there were powerful restrictions surrounding it. At the center of these palaces, there was a golden palace that stood out like a crane among chickens. Above this palace, there was a halo that looked like the blazing sun at dawn. From afar, it looked like the blazing sun rising at dawn. This was the real Liang Palace. It was a powerful force that ruled the entire continent as well as the southern part of Huaxia Heaven Domain. It was second only to the 100 halls of Taiching Immortal Realm. At this moment, in front of Liang Palace's majestic gate, there were 2 guards in mighty armor standing on both sides of the gate. Look, what's that? It seems like there's a flying divine tool approaching and it's heading straight for our Liang Palace. One of the guards pointed at the space-time roulette that was approaching in the sky. Another guard also saw the approaching space-time roulette and said disdainfully, "I wonder which guy is overestimating himself. It seems like he wants to break into our Liang Palace. He's really courting death." You should know that the restrictions around our Liang Palace were set up by a level 9 divine array master from the Taiching immortal realm at a high price. The guard nodded and leisurely leaned on the doorpost. He looked at the approaching flying divine tool with ridicule. In their opinion, there was a good show to watch. Rumble. Suddenly, the flying divine tool surpassed the speed of sound and crashed into the Liang Palace's restriction. Then, an invisible shockwave swept out in all directions. A terrifying earthquake rocked the entire continent. The Liang Palace's restriction only lasted for a breath's time before it was completely shattered. The two guards who were leaning on the doorpost to watch the show froze. They didn't even have time to change their expressions before their necks were pierced by two streaks of divine power and they fell to the ground. Enemy attack. Someone broke the palace protecting array. Everyone move out and destroy the intruder. Which bastard is it? How dare he attack our Liang Palace? He must be tired of living. The moment the Liang Palace's restriction was broken, it immediately attracted the attention of many experts inside the Liang Palace. Then, one figure after another rushed out of the Liang Palace. The guards of the Liang Palace were like locusts as they swarmed towards the entrance of the Liang Palace. He actually used brute force to break the Liang Palace's restriction. Is this guy a monster? Shi Dai stood stiffly on the deck of the space-time roulette. Chapter 26:11. Li Yu. The terrifying thunder fire was like an angry dragon as it exploded in the entire Liang Palace. This thunder fire was like the most loyal guard as it surrounded Juan and the rest. Any cultivator who approached would have to endure the terror of the thunder fire. Juan had his hands behind his back as he slowly walked towards the tallest palace in the Liang Palace area. His gaze was calm, as if nothing in this world could cause him to waver. Shi Dai followed behind and looked at the white-clothed youth who had his hands behind his back as he slowly walked forward. She had the illusion that this person was invincible. Looking at the cultivators who kept dying in Liang Palace, Shi Dai had mixed feelings. She knew that she had greatly underestimated the man in front of her. However, Shi Dai was also extremely glad that she was able to find an expert like Jun. The stronger Juan was, the greater the hope of saving her clansmen. Nearly 100 Liang Palace cultivators were like moths to a flame. When they tried to kill Juan, they all fell under the power of the Thunder Fire Sword. The remaining Liang Palace cultivators who appeared all revealed fearful expressions. They surrounded Juan and the rest from afar, not daring to approach at all. "Sir, who are you? Why are you trespassing into my Liang Palace?" Suddenly, from the tallest palace, a middle-aged man dressed in a luxurious golden robe led a group of people into the palace. When the middle-aged man walked out of the palace and discovered that nearly 100 elites had died, anger flashed across his eyes. However, his gaze quickly landed on Juan and the thunder fire sword that surrounded Juan and the rest. A trace of fear flashed across his eyes. He could feel that the thunder fire sword surrounding Juan was extremely terrifying. It actually gave him a sense of death. It could be seen that the thunder fire sword was definitely not an ordinary divine sword. Palace Master! Palace Master! The cultivators who surrounded Juan and the rest from afar all landed around the middle-aged man in golden luxurious clothes. They looked at Juan with fear in their eyes. Juan stopped and raised his head. He looked at the middle-aged man indifferently and said, "You are the Palace Master of Liang Palace?" The middle-aged man cupped his fists at Juan and said, "That's right. Your Excellency is very strong. You shouldn't be a nobody. Now that you attacked my Liang Palace without any explanation, you should at least give me an explanation, right?" Juan shook his head and said, "You are not qualified for me to give you an explanation. I came to Liang Palace for the Shi family." "A member of the Shi family?" The middle-aged man was startled. His eyes were filled with confusion. When Juan saw the expression on the middle-aged man's face, He knew that the Sher clansmen were captured by the Liyang Palace. This man didn't know about it. It seems like the Liyang Palace's young palace master secretly sent people to capture the Sher clansmen. By the way, I think you can ask your son about the Sher family. I heard that the Sher family was captured by the young palace master of Liyang Palace. Zhuan stood quietly in the same place, calmly looking at the middle-aged man. The calmer Zhuan was, the more pressure the middle-aged man felt. He could feel that even if he took action, he might not be able to deal with the white-clothed youth in front of him. If he wanted to deal with the white-clothed youth, he knew that the only way was to send out the old ancestor of Liyang Palace. However, the old ancestor was the foundation of Liyang Palace. Moreover, the old ancestor was in the critical period of a breakthrough. He naturally couldn't rashly awaken the old ancestor. This little bastard, why is he always causing trouble for me? Now he has provoked such an existence. The middle-aged man's heart was filled with hatred. He immediately cupped his hands politely to Zhuan and said, "Brother, I don't know about the Sher clansmen. If it is really my son who did it, I will immediately go find him and ask him to hand over the Sher clansmen. Moreover, Liyang Palace is willing to compensate you to appease your anger." Zhuan stood in the same place and didn't speak. He only looked at the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man quickly ordered his subordinates to call the young palace master. Not long after, the subordinate brought in a young man who was dressed more luxuriously than the middle-aged man. However, the young man's face was filled with impatience. When he came to the middle-aged man's side, he said with some annoyance, "I say, father, why did you call me over? I was just having fun, and you sent someone to disturb me. It's very disappointing, okay?" The middle-aged man slapped the young man's face. The latter covered his face and was stunned for a moment. He then screamed, "Father, are you crazy? You actually hit me. I remember that you have never hit me before, right?" Zhuan looked at the crazy young man with a mocking gaze and secretly shook his head. This young man was a typical good-for-nothing. His cultivation was extremely ordinary and his footsteps were unsteady. It was obvious that he was immersed in wine and women all year round. "Did you capture the Sher clansmen?" The middle-aged man suppressed his anger and asked. He also knew that his son was extremely useless. However, he was still his flesh and blood, so he had always doted on him. Although he knew that his son used his identity as the young palace master of Liyang Palace to stir up trouble everywhere, he was basically active within Liyang Palace. Basically, he would not provoke anyone that Liyang Palace could not afford to provoke. Now, because his son had captured the Sher clansmen, he had provoked the terrifying young man in white. This made the middle-aged man hate his son for not living up to his expectations. The young man frowned slightly and said, "Yes, father. The Sher clan is just an insignificant clan. Although they have some experts, it is fine if they are destroyed. Why do you have to be so angry?" At this moment, Sher Dai was so angry that she hurriedly walked forward and shouted, "Li Yu, do you have any shame? Our Sher clan has never provoked you. Isn't it because my eldest sister doesn't like you and rejected you? You actually destroyed our Sher clan and captured our Sher clan's direct descendants. Don't you think that is too much?" The young man named Liu only just noticed Zhuan. He did not even look at Zhuan. His eyes fell on Sher Dai and he grinned. "Oh, so you are here. I have been looking for you everywhere and you have delivered yourself to my doorstep." Then, Liu suddenly rushed out and rushed toward Sher Dai. Divine power gathered in his right hand and he actually wanted to grab Sher Dai back. Sher Dai's pretty face changed greatly. She did not expect Liu to rush over without knowing the situation. The middle-aged man was so scared that his face turned pale. He did not expect Liu to rush out like this. When he wanted to pull Liu back, it was already too late. Liu had already approached Sher Dai. However, the moment Liu was about to reach Sher Dai, four sword lights rushed over and a golden light shield appeared on the surface of Liu's body. Unfortunately, the golden light barrier was useless against the four sword lights. It shattered into countless golden light spots. Puchi. Then, Liu's limbs were all broken. He fell to the ground in a sorry state and screamed miserably. "You bastard, how dare you attack me? Do you know who I am? You bastard!" Chapter 26:12. Absolute crushing at this moment, the young man in white was surrounded by a divine sword that was condensed with thunder and fire. Just now, this divine sword had slashed out 4 times in an instant and cut off his 4 limbs. The middle-aged man's face suddenly turned gloomy. This young man in white had cut off his son's limbs in front of him. Obviously, he didn't give him any face. Zhuowen stepped on Li Yu's mouth, causing the guy's cursing to turn into a whimper. "Brother, aren't you going too far? Li Yu is the young palace master of our Liang Palace. How dare you act so recklessly? Are you looking down on our Liang Palace?" The middle-aged man said angrily. "I haven't punished this person yet. He actually dared to attack me in front of me. I'm already being merciful by not killing him on the spot." Zhuowen exerted force with his right foot and a circular air wave appeared under his foot. Li Yu's head was directly stepped into the ground, forming a big pit. Li Yu's struggling became much smaller. His whole body twitched and he screamed, "You are courting death." The veins on the middle-aged man's forehead burst. The dozen experts beside him turned into dozens of black shadows and shot toward Jun. Zhuowen's mouth was full of a sneer. He stood still and didn't attack at all. The thunder and fire sword swept out like a shuttle and instantly turned into dozens of swords. The dozen experts who rushed out didn't even have the chance to make a sound before they were burned to ashes by the terrifying thunder and fire energy. At the same time, hundreds of Liang Palace cultivators had received the middle-aged man's order and attacked Jun. These cultivators stepped in the air with mysterious steps and instantly formed an extremely terrifying joint formation. The divine power of hundreds of cultivators gathered together and formed an extremely huge starry sky giant. The starry sky giant held the starry sky giant sword and roared, slashing toward Jun. The thunder and fire sword drew a trajectory in the air and instantly blocked in front of Zhuowen, slamming into the starry sky giant sword. Ka-ka-ka! Countless gusts of wind swept out like the most terrifying wind blades in the world. Large areas of Liang Palace's buildings were turned into ruins. "Humph! You dare to be arrogant in front of this dragon lord? You're not qualified." Xiaohei's cold voice rang out. Instantly, the lightning and fire energy converged to form a gigantic lightning and fire dragon. The starry sky giant sword was directly shattered into countless pieces by the thunderfire dragon, while the thunderfire giant was like a hot knife through butter. The moment it shattered the starry sky giant sword, it soared into the sky and heavily slammed into the starry sky giant. Rumble! A thunderous explosion resounded. The starry sky giant let out a blood-curdling scream. It couldn't withstand the bombardment of the thunder fire dragon at all. It completely collapsed. The moment the starry sky giant collapsed, hundreds of cultivators screamed and died, turning into lifeless corpses. The middle-aged man's pupils constricted as he stared at the scene in disbelief, his mouth slightly agape. The thunderfire sword returned to Zhuowen's side, while Zhuowen lifted Li Yu from under his feet. At this moment, Li Yu was on the verge of death. However, when he saw Jun, he shouted, "You bastard, how dare you treat me like this? I'm the young palace master of Liang Palace. Disrespecting me is disrespecting Liang Palace. You'll eventually suffer the wrath of Liang Palace." Before Li Yu could finish his words, he realized that something was wrong. Logically speaking, the experts of Liang Palace should have already taken action when he was brutally beaten up by this person. Moreover, his father shouldn't just stand by and watch. Only then did Li Yu look at the middle-aged man. He noticed that his father was standing alone in front of him, trembling all over. His expression was filled with fear. Then, Li Yu's gaze fell on the surroundings and he immediately gasped. There were corpses piled up around him. Most of them were badly damaged by the lightning and fire energy. It was a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. Li Yu recognized these people because they were the experts of Liang Palace. However, they were all corpses now. Could it be that all of them were done by this white-robed young man? How was this possible? "Father! Kill him, kill this bastard. Let him know the painful price of offending our Liang Palace." Li Yu screamed at the middle-aged man in front of him who was in a daze. However, Li Yu soon discovered that his father, the palace master of Liang Palace, revealed a look of fear. Then, he turned into a rainbow and fled towards Liang Palace. Father, Liu was a little stunned. His father was the palace master of Liang Palace. Could it be that he was afraid? Was it because of this white-robed young man? Xiao He. Zhuan was expressionless. The Thunderfire sword immediately followed Zhuowen's will and turned into a terrifying lightning and fire energy. It fiercely streaked across the void and rushed towards the middle-aged man who was fleeing. The middle-aged man seemed to have sensed something and roared. He flicked his finger and took out a divine weapon from his spiritual ring. The quality of each divine weapon wasn't low. One divine weapon after another blocked in front of the middle-aged man. Unfortunately, the moment these divine weapons touched the Thunderfire sword, they seemed to spontaneously combust and were destroyed by the lightning and fire energy, turning into countless ashes. The middle-aged man was horrified. He suddenly took out a huge golden shield from his spiritual ring. The surface of the shield was covered with strange patterns. It was golden and emitted an ancient aura. Ding! The Thunderfire sword shot over like a furious dragon and finally hit the shield. The Thunderfire sword that was like a hot knife through butter stopped the moment it hit the shield. A crisp sound soared into the sky. The middle-aged man hid behind the shield. When he saw the shield blocked the Thunderfire sword, he let out a sigh of relief. However, his heart was like a raging storm. This golden shield was given to him by the ancestor of Liang Palace. It was a life-saving item that could only be used in a life-and-death situation. He didn't expect that the white-robed young man didn't even make a move, and the divine sword forced him to use his final trump card. Then, how terrifying was this white-robed young man? Break for me! At this moment, Xiao He floated above the Thunderfire sword. She stretched out a small claw and slapped the Thunderfire sword's body. Suddenly, the lightning and fire energy on the surface of the Thunderfire sword became extremely violent. It was like a rainbow piercing through the sun. Then, terrifying cracks appeared on the surface of the huge golden shield. Moreover, these cracks continued to spread and eventually covered the entire surface of the golden shield. Then, the golden shield completely shattered into pieces with a cracking sound. The middle-aged man hiding behind the golden shield didn't even have time to react. The Thunderfire sword had already pierced his chest and nailed him to the ground. The terrifying lightning and fire covered the middle-aged man's body, causing him to scream miserably. Even if the middle-aged man used the illusory sky bridge and ignited it to erupt his body's potential, it was still useless. The lightning and fire energy was like maggots that burned the middle-aged man's life force. Chapter 2613. Underground Prison. Where are you keeping the Shi family members? Zhuowen looked at the dazed Liu and asked indifferently. Liu screamed, "Don't kill me. I'll tell you where the Shi family members are being held. Just don't kill me." Zhuowen looked at Liu quietly, waiting for the latter to continue. Liu was now extremely afraid of Zhuowen. He quickly told the location of the Shi family members to Zhuowen in great detail. Zhuowen nodded and looked at Shi Dai behind him. Shi Dai understood tacitly and immediately rushed towards the interior of Liang Palace. It turned out that Liu had imprisoned the Shi family members in his own underground prison. The underground prison was specially built by Liu for the purpose of torturing the people he captured and pleasing himself. Shi Dai walked in front while Zhuowen silently followed behind her. As for Crepe Myrtle Star and the green-haired corpse, they didn't follow. They just found a place outside Liang Palace to sit down and wait. After a while, Shi Dai arrived at Liu's palace. She followed Liu's instructions and opened the entrance to the underground prison hidden under his bed. The moment she entered the pitch-black underground prison, Zhuowen's divine sense had already scanned the underground prison. His brows furrowed and a trace of killing intent appeared in his eyes. Shi Dai was worried about the Shi family members, so she didn't use her divine sense to scan the underground prison. Instead, she rushed into the depths of the prison. When Shi Dai entered the deepest part of the prison, she couldn't help but scream. Zhuowen slowly walked out and threw Liu to the ground. Liu groaned in pain and curled up into a ball, shivering. The inside of the prison was filled with the smell of decay and blood. The originally blue stone floor was now dyed dark red with blood. It was a shocking sight. Cold crosses were placed on the four walls of the prison, and each cross had a woman hanging on it. Their limbs were all nailed to the crosses by thick nails, and fresh blood was constantly flowing down. Zhuan even saw that some of the women on the cross were already dead. Their bodies were rotting and maggots were growing on them. In the deepest part of the crosses, there was an iron fence, and inside the iron fence were many women. These women curled up together like injured kittens, looking fearfully at Zhuan and the others who had just barged in. "Second miss? Are you the second miss?" Suddenly, a timid voice came from the other side of the iron fence. It was a young maidservant. Her young and tender face was filled with sorrow and fear. Shi Dai finally came back to her senses and hurriedly came to the front of the iron fence. Looking at the young maidservant, she hurriedly said, Are you all right? Where is my elder sister?" "Kacha." Zhuan waved his sleeve, and the iron fence was completely shattered. The woman inside was still curled up in the corner, looking at Li Yu, who had been tossed aside by Zhuan, with fear in her eyes. Only the servant girl called Jiao came out shakily with Shi Dai's support. However, Jiao didn't dare to approach Li Yu. Even though Li Yu's limbs were broken, she was still afraid of this demon-like man from the bottom of her heart. Zhuan shook his head inwardly. He didn't know how these poor women were treated in the dungeon to make them show such fear when they saw Li Yu. "Jiao, don't be afraid. Li Yu's limbs are broken. He's no threat to us. Tell me, where is my elder sister?" Shi Dai hurriedly asked. Jiao, however, began to cry. She pointed at the cross in the corner and said, "Eldest miss is there. Ever since she was captured by this demon, he has been torturing her every day." Shi Dai's heart skipped a beat. She immediately came to the cross in the corner. The woman on the cross had long hair that covered her face. Because her position was too remote, Shi Dai didn't notice her at first. When Shi Dai looked at the long-haired woman in front of her, the anger in her eyes flared up. This was because the woman's skin had been peeled off, and her entire body was covered in blood. Shi Dai parted her long hair and looked at the unrecognizable face under the long hair. Her tears flowed uncontrollably. Zhuan stood behind Shi Dai. Looking at the woman's miserable state, he couldn't help but frown. This Li Yu really wasn't a good person. He was actually so vicious and ruthless. Moreover, Yun discovered that the woman had completely lost her vitality. She was clearly tortured to death by Li Yu. "Li Yu, I'm going to kill you." Shi Dai pounced at Li Yu like a madman. She took out a small knife from her spirit ring and stabbed it at Li Yu's chest. "Senior, you promised me that you wouldn't kill me." Li Yu was terrified and hurriedly asked Zhuan for help. Unfortunately, Zhuan's gaze was cold. He said indifferently, "I never said that. It's just your own wishful thinking that I won't kill you." Li Yu revealed a look of despair. Then he saw Shi Dai's crazy face. Screams of despair resounded throughout the entire dungeon. Zhuan waved his sleeve and summoned a flame, burning all the corpses in the dungeon to ashes. Shi Dai, on the other hand, was determined to leave her elder sister's corpse behind. She wanted to prepare a grand funeral for her elder sister. Zhuan didn't refuse. Instead, he let Shi Dai take the Shi family members and leave Liang Palace first. When Shi Dai finished organizing the survivors in the dungeon, Zhuan's eyes narrowed. He revealed a dignified expression. Shi Dai sensed Zhuan's abnormality and asked, "What's wrong?" Just as Shi Dai finished speaking, the entire dungeon suddenly collapsed. Then, a huge palm descended from the sky and violently blasted the top of the dungeon. The dungeon collapsed. Intense light poured into the dungeon from the huge crack above. Then, a huge palm descended and finally landed above Zhuan and the others. Shi Dai looked at the huge palm. Her entire body trembled and revealed a look of despair. This palm was too powerful. It was so powerful that she couldn't even muster the slightest thought of resisting. The only thought in Shi Dai's mind was whether the white-clothed youth in front of her could block this huge palm. Zhuan indifferently raised his head and looked at the huge palm. With his hands behind his back, the Thunderfire sword turned into a flash of lightning and fire. It quickly swept over and slashed at the palm. A hole was directly cut open in the terrifying palm. Moreover, The hole grew bigger and bigger until it finally swallowed the palm. Miss Sherdai, you just need to bring the people and follow behind me. Zhuowen's gentle voice sounded. Sherdai stared blankly at the back in front of her. She could only subconsciously nod. Seeing Zhuowen walk forward, she followed closely behind like a puppet. While following behind Zhuowen, the palm above once again condensed and slapped down. However, it was all destroyed by the Thunderfire Sword. Chapter 26:14. Block my move. The moment Zhuowen walked out of the dungeon, the entire dungeon collapsed with a loud rumble, turning into ruins. Not only that, but Li Yu's palace was also in ruins. There was no trace of the dazzling palace. In the sky above the ruins, the energy of lightning and fire seemed to burn the sky, enveloping the entire horizon. The Thunderfire Sword was like a rainbow as it shuttled through the lightning and fire. Every time it moved, dazzling sparks would pop out. Inside the lightning and fire, a stalwart figure was emitting rays of light like the rising sun. He was constantly resisting the attacks of the Thunderfire Sword. That's the Sunrise Palace's ancestor. He's an expert at the peak of the Void Sky 8 steps. I remember that he was in seclusion. Now that he came out, he must have successfully broken through. Sherdai looked at the stalwart figure inside the lightning and fire, then at Zhuowen. Her beautiful eyes revealed a worried expression. Zhuowen's expression was calm as he looked at the figure blocking the Thunderfire Sword. His eyes revealed a hint of interest. If he wasn't mistaken, this Sunrise Palace's ancestors' cultivation had just broken through to the 9th step half-step Void Sky 9 steps. However, his strength was much stronger than an ordinary 9th step half-step Void Sky 9 steps expert. It seemed like this person was not simple. However, Zhuowen was very clear about Xiao Hei's strength. Even if Xiao Hei was at the Life Enlightenment realm, he still had trump cards. Not to mention this Sunrise Palace's ancestor who was only at the 9th step Void Sky 9 steps expert. The Sunrise Palace's ancestor had a head full of white hair and his eyes were filled with hostility. At this moment, the more he fought, the more frightened he became. He didn't expect the invader's divine sword to be so terrifying. Even he was at a disadvantage. Who the hell are you? Why do you want to kill my Sunrise Palace's people? Our Sunrise Palace has never provoked you, right? The Sunrise Palace's ancestor looked at Zhuowen and shouted in anger. My name is Zhuowen. Your Liang Palace's young palace lord, Li Yu, threatened to kill me. Your Liang Palace lord even sent out elites to surround and annihilate me. I didn't seem to have taken the initiative to provoke them, but they just had to provoke me. Zhuowen said in a calm tone. The moment the old man from Liang Palace heard the name Zhuowen, his mind went blank as if it had been struck by lightning. He had heard of Zhuowen's name recently. Although he had been in seclusion all this time, his servants would promptly inform him of major events in the outside world. Especially Zhuowen, who had suddenly risen to prominence in the Grand Clarity Immortal Realm. Not only had he killed the patriarch of the Mountain River Hall, Su Liang, but he had also killed the dozens of hall masters and the elite cultivators of the 100 halls who had come to besiege him. It could be said that Zhuowen had become famous after that battle. His name had spread throughout the entire Huaxia Heaven domain. Zhuowen's name represented a ruthless person that absolutely could not be provoked. Therefore, many major powers in the Huaxia Heaven domain would warn their successors to be careful of Zhuowen. Moreover, they would share Zhuowen's appearance with them so that they would remember his true appearance. I didn't expect it to be Lord Zhuowen. I have offended you. Please forgive me, Lord Zhuowen. I will leave now and no longer disturb you. The Sunrise Palace's ancestor quickly said. Zhuowen raised his head and the corner of his mouth revealed a trace of an arc. He said, Where did your imposing manner of wanting to kill me just now go? I, Zhuowen, have never been someone who is afraid of trouble. Since you had the intention of killing me from the start, then I, Zhuowen, will naturally return the favor. This Sunrise Palace's ancestor clearly had the intention of killing Zhuowen in the dungeon. If it wasn't for the fact that Zhuowen was powerful, perhaps he would have already been buried in the dungeon. When the old ancestor of Liang Palace heard Zhuowen's name, he apologized and wanted to leave. Did he really think that Zhuowen was easy to bully? Did he think that he could come and go as he pleased? Zhuowen stomped his right foot and shot out like an arrow leaving the bow. The aura on his body rose steadily. His long hair flew and his clothes fluttered. Originally, he only looked like an ordinary youth. However, at this moment, Zhuowen, who was releasing his aura, was like a peerless master. He was like a towering mountain that could not be reached. Zhuowen flicked his finger and a blood-red light flew out from his spirit ring. It turned into a blood-red divine sword. It was the Blood Immortal Sword. Zhuowen's left hand held the hilt of the Blood Immortal Sword and immediately rushed into the endless thunder and fire in the sky. Xiao He! Zhuowen's indifferent voice sounded. The thunder fire sword that shuttled through the thunder and fire emitted a sword hum. It violently flew out and landed in Zhuowen's right hand. Zhuowen held the swords with both hands. One of them was surging with blood energy while the other was surrounded by thunder and fire. They floated in midair and looked indifferently at the Sunrise Palace's ancestor like a fiend god. If you can block one of my moves, then I'll let you live. Zhuowen was expressionless as he said indifferently. The Sunrise Palace's ancestor's pupils constricted and then his eyes revealed anger. He felt that the white-clothed youth before him was too arrogant. Although he had heard of Zhuowen's various battle achievements and knew that this person had caused a great commotion in the Taiching immortal realm and had extremely terrifying strength, he was confident that he was still confident. Even if he knew that this Zhuowen's strength was terrifying, he believed that it wouldn't be a problem for him to block one of this person's moves. The Sunrise Palace's ancestor took out one divine artifact after another from his spirit ring. Moreover, he also took out various talismans and other items to block around him. Clearly, the Sunrise Palace's ancestor was extremely cautious about blocking Zhuowen's move. Zhuowen stood in front of the Sunrise Palace's ancestor and quietly waited. The Sunrise Palace's ancestor was making various preparations there. "Are you ready?" Zhuowen looked at the Sunrise Palace's ancestor who was waiting solemnly and asked with slight mockery. Sunrise Palace's surroundings were surrounded by countless brilliance. These were the brilliance produced by divine artifacts, talismans, and various other items. These items could be said to have been collected by him over the years. In order to block Zhuowen's attack, he could be said to have put in a lot of effort. He's too arrogant. Moreover, he even said such big words. When the time comes, he will definitely release the tiger back to the mountain. Shi Dai stomped her foot and snorted in a slight fit of anger. Shi Dai's strength wasn't strong. She had never heard of Zhuowen's name, so she didn't know how powerful Zhuowen was. However, she knew how powerful the Sunrise Palace's ancestor was. In addition to Zhuowen's big words, she believed that Zhuowen wouldn't be able to kill the Sunrise Palace's ancestor in one move. When the time came, the Sunrise Palace's ancestor would definitely escape. And if the Sunrise Palace's ancestor escaped and didn't die, it would be a huge disaster for her Shi family. With Zhuowen's strength, the Sunrise Palace's old ancestor might not dare to seek revenge. Furthermore, their Shi family was just a small family. If the Sunrise Palace's old ancestor were to seek revenge, he would only need to lift a finger and their Shi family would be finished. However, Shi Dai could only say these words in her heart. After all, this white-clothed youth helped her because of the space-time divine key. Chapter 26:15. The third space-time Qilai Yang Palace's ancestor coldly looked at the white-clothed youth with a mocking smile. His heart was filled with anger as he coldly said, "Of course it's fine. After all, this old man is a half-step void sky ninth step expert. Blocking one of your moves won't be a problem. When the time comes, you better keep your promise." "I, Zhuowen, always keep my word." Zhuowen's indifferent voice resounded. Shortly after, he crossed his arms in front of his chest and fiercely slashed forward. A blood-colored sword ray and a lightning fire sword ray combined to form a cross-shaped slash. It soared through the heavens and earth as if it contained the entire heaven and earth. The instant the cross-shaped slash was unleashed, Li Yang Palace's ancestor's expression completely changed. He actually felt an extremely dense threat of death from the cross-shaped slash. "This move is too terrifying. I can't take it head-on. Otherwise, I'll die without a doubt." Li Yang Palace's ancestor roared in his heart. He was terrified. Then he stomped his right foot and flew backward. He didn't plan to take Zhuowen's move head-on. However, the instant Liang Palace's ancestor retreated, countless invisible ripples appeared around him. It was like an invisible rope that blocked his path, making it impossible for him to retreat. Ninth level array? Who set it up? Liang Palace's ancestor's expression was gloomy. Soon after, he looked at the white-clothed youth who was still floating in the air. He knew that this guy must have set it up in advance. I can only take it head-on. Liang Palace's ancestor roared in his heart as he looked at the approaching cross-shaped slash. The divine force in his body swelled, and he even took out the illusory sky bridge and began to burn it. He was very clear that after feeling the terrifying aura of the cross-shaped slash, if he didn't go all out, he wouldn't be able to take it head-on. Like a meteor crashing into a planet, the cross-shaped slash cut through the sky and finally landed on Liang Palace's ancestor's body. Soon after, the entire horizon was filled with dazzling rays of light. Liang Palace's ancestor roared towards the sky as he watched the divine tools and talismans around him shatter one by one. He was still desperately burning the illusory sky bridge, hoping to stop the divine tools from shattering. Unfortunately, all of his efforts were in vain and in vain. In the end, when all the defenses were shattered, the illusory sky bridge shattered, and the Sunrise Palace's ancestor was on the verge of death. He raised his head with great difficulty, and through the end of the blazing light, he looked at the white-clothed young man that floated in the air like a god or devil from afar. He knew that he was too wrong. The existence in front of him was a terrifying existence that he could never hope to reach. It was just one move. He had made sufficient preparations, but he still couldn't block it. In the end, what he faced was the darkness of death. That person who caused a sensation in the Grand Clarity Immortal Realm really lives up to his reputation. Our Liang Palace's fate has come to an end. After the old ancestor of Liang Palace spat out these words, he disappeared into the light. When all the light faded away, what was revealed was a dark and cold starry sky. It was boundless, and the old ancestor of Liang Palace had disappeared. So, terrifying? Liang Palace's old ancestor died just like that? Sherdai slowly opened her mouth. She stared blankly at everything in front of her. After confirming that what she saw wasn't an illusion, she looked at the white-clothed young man with a complicated expression. Only now did she realize that the white-clothed young man wasn't boasting, but telling the truth. He really did have the strength to kill the old ancestor of Liang Palace in one move. Many cultivators in the vicinity of Sunrise Palace also saw this battle. They were all trembling as they looked at the white-robed young man who had killed the Sunrise Palace's patriarch with one move like a god. The Sher family members looked at the white-clothed young man with admiration. Some of them even crossed their arms in front of their chest as if they were praying. When Zhuowen landed in front of Sherdai again, Sherdai's attitude changed again. It became reverent and respectful. I've already successfully completed the task you've assigned to me. Shouldn't it be your turn to complete the task I've assigned to you? Zhuowen asked indifferently. Sherdai hurriedly lowered her head and said, My lord, regarding the space-time key you mentioned, it is indeed with me. However, because the space-time key involves too many things, I have been hiding it in the Sher family's secret ground. If my lord wants it, Sherdai will immediately find the space-time key and give it to you. My goal is the space-time key. I will go with you to the Sher family. Zhuowen nodded. Half a month later, Zhuowen drove the space-time roulette away from the Sher family's planet and flew towards the exit of China. Zhuowen sat cross-legged on the deck with 3 keys floating in front of him. The 3 keys were almost identical in shape, but the colors were different. They were black, white, and red respectively. Although Zhuowen looked unusually calm, from the depths of his eyes, one could tell that Zhuowen's heart was not as calm as he appeared to be. I can feel the aura of the space-time beasts on these 3 keys. The green-haired mummy looked at the 3 keys in front of Zhuowen and murmured in a low voice. Zhuowen looked at the green-furred corpse cautiously. He still didn't know why the green-furred corpse was following him. So, Zhuowen was still very wary of the green-furred corpse. The green-haired mummy also noticed Zhuowen's vigilance. It shrugged and said indifferently, You don't have to be so wary of me. In my opinion, This thing is just SOSO. I have no interest in competing with you. The mummy sat down and stared blankly. Most of the time, the green-haired mummy was sitting there in a daze. Zhuowen felt that the mummy was recovering its strength. While the mummy was in a daze, Zhuowen could feel that the mummy was absorbing some kind of energy from the surrounding space. That energy was similar to the chaos he saw in the blood-stained horn. At least, it was an unknown energy that Zhuowen had never encountered before. I have heard of the space-time key. I heard that if you gather 3 space-time keys, you can enter the space-time temple. Legend has it that the master of the space-time temple, the space-time master, is an expert who proved his Tao. If you can enter the space-time temple, you will obtain an unparalleled opportunity. Purple Star Monarch looked at the 3 space-time keys floating in front of Zhuowen with envy. Brother Zhua, now that you have gathered 3 space-time keys, when do you plan to activate them and enter the space-time temple? Purple Star Monarch asked. Zhuowen thought to himself and said, I don't plan to enter the space-time temple at the moment. I need to return to the Great Brahma domain and settle down my family and friends. I will only choose to enter the space-time temple after I am completely free. Because I feel that if I enter the space-time temple this time, I will probably stay for a very long time. Moreover, the 8 heavens are in troubled times now. If I don't settle down my family and friends properly, I will not be at ease. Purple Star Monarch nodded and said, Brother Zhua, after I return to the Great Brahma domain, I plan to bid farewell to you. You want to go to Heaven's Moat? Zhuowen's eyes lit up as he asked. Purple Star Monarch nodded and said, Yes, to cultivate to my level, I can be considered to be standing at the peak of the 8 heavens. Moreover, I know the future path of cultivation of the 3 extremities. If I continue to stay in the 8 heavens, it will only limit my cultivation speed. Therefore, I want to go to the Xianmi heavenly domain. Brother Purple Star Monarch, after you go to the Xianmi heavenly domain, be careful. Your cultivation path has already left the human race and is approaching the sorcerer race. If it is exposed that you cultivate the sorcerer race's codex in the Xianmi heavenly domain, I am afraid it will be very troublesome, Zhuowen said worriedly. Purple Star Monarch nodded seriously and said, Thank you, Brother Zhua, for your reminder. I know this. Chapter 26:16. Envoy. 2 months later, the space-time will entered the Great Brahma domain and landed in the Wind Snow Palace. Brother Zhua, this is goodbye. If fate wills it, we will meet again in the Xianmi heavenly region. After landing in the Wind Snow Palace, the Purple Star Monarch cupped his fist to Zhuowen before leaving alone. Zhuowen did not try to keep him. He was clear that the Purple Star Monarch was a person with a firm will. Once he decided on something, he would never regret it. If he tried to keep him, it would be a waste of effort. Zhuowen stood in the Wind Snow Palace's quest hall with the green-haired corpse behind him. This combination was very strange and attracted the attention of many cultivators in the quest hall. Zhuowen casually strolled around the quest hall and found that the quest hall was even more complete than when he left. He secretly nodded in his heart. Zhuowen took out a communication jade talisman. When he was prepared to inform Qin Shui that he was back, a clear voice called out to him. Zhuowen turned around and looked at the beautiful girl behind him. He said with a smile, Qime, you're also in the quest hall? The one who appeared behind Zhuowen was Tong Qime. She had just finished handing in her mission when she saw Zhuowen. She immediately recognized him, so she called out to him. Big Brother Zhua, why didn't you tell us that you were back? Tong Qime said in an excited voice. Zhuowen revealed a faint smile and said, I was about to inform them when I met you. Tong Qime was stunned. She stuck out her tongue and then led Zhuowen out of the quest hall, entering the Wind Snow Palace. After leaving for a while, Zhuowen came to the Wind Snow Palace again. He found that there were many more cultivators in the Wind Snow Palace compared to before and the security was much tighter. I'll go call Master. Master is the temporary palace master of the Wind Snow Palace. Now that Big Brother Zhua is back, Master will give the palace master position to you. Tong Qime said with a smile while walking. Your Master Waning Moon? Where's Qin Shui? Zhuowen asked with a frown. Tong Qime stopped and looked at Zhuowen strangely. Brother Zhua, you still don't know about that matter? What is it? I just came back. Zhuan said. An envoy from the Xianmi heavenly region has arrived. This envoy has summoned the leaders of the 8 heavenly domains to the core of the 8 heavenly domains, Su's temple. Palace Master Chen Shui brought Senior Magatama, Master Yuezu, and the elites of Wenshui Palace to Xiu's temple, Tong Chimei said. Zhuan was stunned. He was no stranger to the Hu temple. It was indeed the core of the 8 heavens. It was a building that did not belong to any of the heavens. It was said that the origin of the 8 heavens was hidden within. Of course, this was only a legend. Zhuan recalled the memories of Old Man Heifu. According to Old Man Heifu's memories, this space had originated from the mythological era on Earth. Earth was the origin, and the Hu temple had legends of its origin. He wondered if the two were related. Only one envoy from the Xianmi heavenly region has arrived? Zhuan asked. Only one envoy has arrived so far. It is said that the true experts of the Xianmi heavenly region will arrive soon. As for whether it is true, I am not sure, Tong Chimei said. Zhuan nodded and said, Chimei, don't spread the news of my return. I am still a little worried. I plan to make a trip to the Hu temple. But before you leave, take this. After saying that, Zhuan took out a black ball. This black ball was formed by the Devourer King's devouring power. It could be divided continuously, as long as it carried the devouring power he gave it. Zhuan could follow the connection of the devouring power and send the cultivator who carried the mark of the devouring power into the Devourer King's body. The Ryuka clansman had developed well in the Devourer King's body. Therefore, Zhuan was not worried about the Ryuka clansman. He was worried about his friends in the Great Brahma heavenly region and Muchinshua. Remember, distribute this thing to those who are truly loyal to the Wenshui Palace and those who are trustworthy. This thing can save your life at a critical moment, Zhuan said in a serious tone. Seeing Zhuan being so serious, Tong Chimei quickly nodded and said, Big brother Zhua, don't worry. I will take good care of this thing. Moreover, I will strictly select the ones you want. Zhuan nodded. Soon after, he gave a few instructions and quietly left the Wenshui Palace. He did not know why, but after hearing that Chen Shui was heading to the Hu temple, Zhuan felt a little uneasy. It was because of this uneasiness that Zhuan was in a hurry to leave the Wenshui Palace and head to the Hu temple. Summoning the space-time roulette, the green-haired mummy jumped onto it. Zhuan was too lazy to care about the green-haired mummy. He summoned Xiao He and left the Wenshui Palace. This time, Zhuan did not fly leisurely. Instead, he rushed out. He wanted to head to the Hu temple in the shortest time possible. After leaving the Wenshui Palace for a day, Zhuan stopped in front of a star, as if he was waiting for something. It didn't take long for the star to suddenly explode, and a colossal blood-red beast burst out from the star. Bloodscale, long time no see. Your strength has increased again. Zhuan looked at the blood-red beast that rushed out from the star and said calmly. Zhuan could feel that Bloodscale's strength was indeed much stronger than before. Moreover, Zhuan could not see through Bloodscale's strength. The blood-red beast looked at Zhuan and gradually shrunk. It turned into a blood-red clothed middle-aged man and quickly landed on the space-time roulette. The moment Bloodscale landed on the deck, he immediately noticed the green-haired mummy. He felt that the green-haired mummy had an aura that made him feel awe, which made him feel bewildered. Bloodscale, come with me to the Hu temple. Zhuan did not plan on introducing the green-haired mummy to Bloodscale. He only told him the reason for his visit. Bloodscale nodded. He had a contract with Zhuan, so he could be considered as Zhuan's servant. Even if his strength had increased, he did not dare to betray him. He could only be Zhuan's servant for 1,000 years. The core region of the 8 heavens was a cold and dark void. There was nothing in this void, not even the sun, moon, or stars. There were only pitch-black meteorite belts and unchanging darkness. In the middle of this void floated a dilapidated temple. This temple was so dilapidated that it looked like a ruin, as if it had not been repaired for a long time. At the top of the temple, a golden flame burned fiercely, as if guiding those who entered this void to this place. In the temple, a figure stood quietly with his hands behind his back. He looked at the void in front of him with a cold gaze. This figure was a middle-aged man with a face as cold as a knife. He was dressed in a black robe, and a powerful aura surged from his body. Upon closer inspection, this person's pores were constantly spitting out strange black mist. This black mist was like agile little snakes, circling around his body and making hissing sounds. It seems that the first guest is about to arrive. The cold man looked forward, narrowed his eyes, and muttered to himself. Whoosh! Chapter 26:17. Solicitation. The stern-looking man still had his hands behind his back. He slowly turned his head and narrowed his eyes at the figure that had appeared in the temple. The golden light receded to reveal an extremely handsome man with a golden bar between his eyebrows. He was the ruler of the Sakyamuni domain. Sakyamuni. You're the messenger from the Xianmi domain? Sakyamuni's eyes were cold as he looked at the stern-looking man. His tone was impolite and somewhat arrogant. Ignorant barbarian, judging from your aura, you must have just become a heavenly Tao master. Unfortunately, your Tao veins are extremely empty. You're clearly still a heavenly Tao master in the initial stages. You're the weakest heavenly Tao master. How dare you speak to me with such an attitude? The stern-looking man crossed his arms and looked at Sakyamuni with a mocking expression. The corners of his mouth curled into a cold smile. Sakyamuni had relied on Taoist Lord Tusida's Tao-confirming divine pill to successfully confirm his Tao. Not long after coming out of seclusion, he had received an invitation from the messenger from the Xianmi domain. That was why he had come to the Hu Divine Temple. Sakyamuni was a cultivator born and raised in the 8 great domains. He didn't have a clear understanding of the realm of Tao confirming. After knowing that he had successfully confirmed his Tao, he was naturally in high spirits. Although he knew that the messenger from the Xianmi domain should also be a Tao-confirming expert, he was also a Tao-confirming expert. Their cultivation levels were equal, so Sakyamuni's attitude was naturally quite arrogant. However, when he saw the stern-looking man's contemptuous expression, Sakyamuni was displeased. His eyes burst with terrifying killing intent and shot toward the stern-looking man like a sharp sword. The stern-looking man narrowed his eyes and stood still. Black chi floated around him and condensed into a huge pitch-black snake head in front of him. Hiss. Sakyamuni's killing intent was easily dispersed by this person's voice, and an aura much stronger than Sakyamuni's came crushing down on him. Sakyamuni let out a muffled groan and couldn't help but take a few steps back, looking at the stern man in shock. The cold-looking man retracted his aura and looked at Sakyamuni. Although you and I are both heavenly path masters, you don't know anything about the path-proving realm, and you don't have the corresponding cultivation method. If we really fight, I can kill you within 10 moves. Sakyamuni's heart trembled. He did not doubt the stern-looking man's words. After all, the stern-looking man could easily disperse his killing intent and injure him with his aura. This in itself proved that he was inferior to the stern-looking man. This jade slip contains a detailed explanation of the Tao-confirming realm, as well as a basic method to cultivate Tao meridians. It can help you consolidate the Tao meridians you have just developed. The stern-looking man waved his sleeve and threw a jet-black jade slip to Sakyamuni. Sakyamuni took the jade slip and was extremely excited. At the same time, he looked at the stern-looking man with some vigilance. Sakyamuni was no ordinary person. After cultivating for so many years, he knew very well that there was no such thing as a free lunch in the world. Not only did the stern-looking man tell him about his cultivation, but he also gave him the cultivation method of the path-proving realm. He did not think that the stern-looking man was being kind. The stern-looking man also saw Sakyamuni's vigilance and smiled. You don't have to be so vigilant. I still don't know your name. Sakyamuni. Sakyamuni said coldly. So you are the heavenly domain master of the Sakyamuni domain. No wonder your talent is so strong. You were able to succeed in the path-proving realm in a barren place like the 8 heavens by yourself. It is enough to show that your talent is outstanding. If you continue to stay in the 8 heavens, your talent will only be buried, said the stern-looking man. Sakyamuni frowned and said in a low voice, You mean you want to recruit me? Water flows downwards, people walk upwards. Do you want to stay in the 8 heavens forever? Also, the 8 heavens will not be peaceful soon. The chances of dying here are too high. I am just giving you a word of advice. The stern-looking man said with his hands behind his back. Since you want to recruit me, you should at least introduce yourself, right? Sakyamuni calmed down and said in a low voice. The stern-looking man nodded in his heart at how quickly Sakyamuni calmed down. Sakyamuni was not only talented, but also had a first-class temperament. The stern-looking man was also a heavenly Tao lord like Sakyamuni. In fact, the stern-looking man was even stronger than Sakyamuni. However, the stern-looking man was very clear that Sakyamuni's talent was much stronger than his. One had to know that with his talent, he could only barely cultivate to the heavenly Tao Lord level in the Xianmi heavenly domain, which was a high-grade region with rich starry sky energy. Moreover, it took him countless years to reach his current achievements. However, Sakyamuni had become a heavenly Tao Lord in the 8 heavens, which was a place with poor starry sky energy. The stern-looking man was very clear about the significance of this. Thinking about it from another perspective, if he was in the 8 heavens, he was very clear that even if he cultivated until the end of his lifespan, he would not be able to succeed. After all, cultivation required extremely high talent. If the upper echelons of their forces knew that he had recruited such a talented genius, they would probably reward him handsomely. Thinking of this, the stern-looking man's heart was filled with excitement. His gaze towards Sakyamuni also became softer and softer. You definitely don't know about the distribution of forces in the Xianmi heavenly domain. Let me introduce myself. My name is Sun Qi. I am a direct disciple of the White Rainbow Hall in the Xianmi heavenly domain's host region. Although White Rainbow Hall is not a Tao sect level force in the host region, it is much stronger than many ordinary forces in the host region. Speaking of the force behind him, Sun Qi's eyes revealed a trace of pride. Sakyamuni was a little surprised. The stern-looking man in front of him was a genuine Tao-confirming expert. His strength was even stronger than his, but he was only a direct disciple. Then how strong was the White Rainbow Hall behind this person? However, Sakyamuni quickly calmed down. Although it was not that the previous heavenly domain lords of the Sakyamuni domain did not go to the Xianmi heavenly domain, they left behind too little information about the Xianmi heavenly domain. Sakyamuni was not completely ignorant. At least he knew that the cultivators of the Xianmi heavenly domain were generally stronger than the 8 heavens. Now that he saw Sun Qi in front of him, Sakyamuni finally understood that the Xianmi heavenly domain was indeed stronger than the 8 heavens. Moreover, it was much stronger than he had imagined. Sakyamuni, if you are willing to join White Rainbow Hall, you can immediately become a direct disciple of White Rainbow Hall. Our White Rainbow Hall's Hall Master may even treat you as his successor. As Sun Qi said this, he looked at Sakyamuni. His eyes were burning with excitement. Although Sakyamuni was quite tempted, he still said calmly, "Brother Sun, I don't think only your White Rainbow Hall knows about the great desolate heavenly domain, right?" The Hall Master of the White Rainbow Hall was the strongest person in the White Rainbow Hall, but he had only reached the peak of the first step of Tao validation. He was still some distance away from the second step. The White Rainbow Hall's Hall Master had been in seclusion for countless years, but he had never been able to break through. All the disciples of Baihong Hall knew that it wasn't that their Hall Master wasn't talented, but that he had a hidden illness and an incomplete Tao heart. That was why he couldn't break through. Therefore, Baihong Hall was now in great need of talented geniuses. If a cultivator in the second step of Tao validation appeared in Baihong Hall would immediately become a Tao sect level force. Establishing a Tao sect in the Xianmi heavenly domain was definitely a great honor. Not only that, but the Tao sect would also be favored by the heavenly Tao law of the Xianmi heavenly domain. It would form a unique heavenly Tao origin dragon vein within the sphere of influence. In the Xianmi heavenly domain, the amount of heavenly Tao origin dragon vein was related to the cultivation speed of Tao validation cultivators. It was closely related to the survival of any force. This was also why Sun Qi wanted to invite Sakyamuni after discovering that he had succeeded in Tao validation in a place like the 8 heavenly domains. With Sakyamuni's talent, Sun Qi believed that as long as he entered the Xianmi heavenly domain, his cultivation speed would be extremely terrifying. It would not be impossible for him to reach the second step of Tao validation, Even if Sakyamuni could not reach the second step of Tao validation, he would at least be able to cultivate to the level of Master Hunyuan. It would not be a bad thing for Bai Hong Hall to have a Master Hunyuan level expert out of nowhere. Maybe you still have a choice, but I still want to remind you that Bai Hong Hall is the most powerful force in the host domain besides the Dao sect level forces. Unless it is a Dao sect level force, your best choice is Bai Hong Hall. Sun Chi said. Sakyamuni nodded and looked at the starry sky outside the temple. He said lightly, I still have a question to ask. You mentioned Dao sect level forces many times. Is there a hierarchy of forces in the Xianmi heavenly domain? Sun Chi was startled and immediately nodded. Yes, the Xianmi heavenly domain is completely different from the 8 heavenly domains. Rather than calling it a heavenly domain, I think it is more accurate to describe it as an infinite world. In the Xianmi heavenly domain, there are countless forces, big and small, innumerable like locusts. Just like where there are people, there are naturally strong and weak forces. Forces are divided into 3 levels, namely Dao sect level, Dao mansion level, and Dao palace level. Forces below the Dao sect level are called ordinary forces. Our Bai Hong Hall is the force closest to the Dao sect level. As long as a second step Dao vindication expert appears, it will immediately be promoted to a Dao sect level force. Sakyamuni narrowed his eyes. He did not expect that Sun Chi's Bai Hong Hall was only an ordinary force in the Xianmi heavenly domain. A Dao sect level force was not the highest level force, but only the first level force. Didn't that mean that the Dao mansion level forces and Dao palace level forces above the Dao sect level forces had more powerful foundations and experts? Then will the Dao palace level forces send experts this time? Sakyamuni asked with a glint in his eyes. Sun Chi glanced at Sakyamuni, shook his head, and said, the Dao palace level forces stand at the peak of the Xianmi heavenly domain. In the entire Xianmi heavenly domain, there are only a handful of them. Every Dao palace level force is an absolute colossus, and they do not appear easily. Also, I heard that the gap in the primitive heavenly domain has been sealed by an expert in advance. This kind of thing really can't alarm the Dao palace level forces, but the Dao mansion level forces will definitely come. After all, only the Dao mansion level forces have an eternal level array Dao master. Hearing Sun Chi say that the Dao palace level forces would not appear, Sakyamuni was slightly disappointed. Sakyamuni was very ambitious. Since he had to choose a force, he naturally wanted to choose the strongest one. Sun Chi also guessed Sakyamuni's thoughts and secretly shook his head. Sakyamuni's talent was indeed powerful, but after all, he came from a small place like the 8 heavenly domains. His knowledge was shallow, and he did not know the vastness of the Xianmi heavenly domain. He also did not know that the Xianmi heavenly domain was filled with even more monstrous geniuses than him. In Sun Chi's opinion, Sakyamuni's talent was not enough to attract the attention of a Dao palace level force. Even a Dao mansion level force might not even take a fancy to them. Even if the Sakra heavenly emperor was given the cold shoulder and entered a Dao mansion level force, he would probably only be an outer sect disciple that wasn't valued and would be treated poorly. On the other hand, Sun Chi's main concern was the Daoist level forces. For a genius like the Sakra, the Dao Palace and Dao Palace level forces wouldn't pay much attention to him, but he would definitely attract the attention of the Daoist level forces. If a Dao sect level force extended an olive branch to Sakyamuni, Sun Chi knew that Bai Hong Hall would not be able to compete at all. Thinking of this, Sun Chi's heart sank, but he did not dare to force Sakyamuni. They were only in the death realm and were even weaker than Elder Qing Lao. Sun Chi frowned. In Sun Chi's opinion, these 3 were indeed more talented than Old Man Qing Lao, but there was a limit. Bai Hong Hall had many cultivators with such talent, but they were only ordinary disciples. Even if they entered Xianmi domain, it would be difficult for them to confirm their Dao. At this moment, there were 5 people sitting at the round table in the center of the temple. Sakyamuni was resting with his eyes closed. He was waiting for Zhuan to appear. Jun killed Great Brahma and became the Lord of Great Brahma's heavens. Now that he received Sun Chi's invitation, he had to come. If he didn't come, he wouldn't be giving face to the messenger. Sun Chi would find trouble with Zhuan even if he didn't do anything. It could be said that whether Zhuan came or not, Sakymune's fate was already sealed. Of course, if he could kill that little bastard himself, Sakyamune would be more than happy. Another 2 streaks of light shot over, revealing 2 beautiful figures. They were 2 graceful women. One of them was tall, but her face was covered with a veil and her eyes were slightly closed. As for the young woman standing beside the veiled woman, her appearance could be said to be peerless and devastatingly beautiful. Even Sun Chi couldn't help but be dazed for a moment when he saw this woman. Sun Chi rarely saw such a beautiful woman even in Shenmi domain, but he actually saw her in such a remote corner of the 8 heavens. May I ask which heavens you represent? Sun Chi rarely asked. Among the 5 people who came, only Sakyamune could make Sun Chi take the initiative to speak. Sun Chi didn't even want to talk to the other 4. 6 desires heavens, Lord of Heavens, Yao Xiangjuan. The beautiful woman's red lips parted slightly. After she finished speaking, her beautiful eyes fell on Sakyamune, who was sitting in the temple, and she didn't hide the killing intent in her eyes. Sakyamune slowly opened his eyes. He looked at Yao Xiangjuan in front of him, and a cruel smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He said indifferently, "Your cultivation is quite fast. You've already reached the 2 extremities of life and death. It should be because of the heaven's origin, spring white snow, right? You were lucky that I didn't notice you, so you took advantage of the loophole to escape. But since you took the initiative to come here today, don't even think about escaping from me." After he finished speaking, Sakyamune closed his eyes again. Yao Xiangjuan's cultivation speed really surprised him, but that was it. If he wanted to kill Yao Xiangjuan now, he could do it with a flip of his hand. It could be said that Sakyamune didn't care much about Yao Xiangjuan. And even if he wanted to take action, he couldn't do it now. He could only wait until Sun Chi finished this meeting. Otherwise, he would lose face for Sun Chi. Sun Chi frowned as he looked at Sakyamune and Yao Xiangjuan, who were confronting each other, and said in a deep voice, "Sit down first." Yao Xiangjuan nodded and sat opposite Sakyamune with Palace Master Jing Yun. Her beautiful eyes stared at Sakyamune. She still couldn't forget the scene when Sakyamune killed Palace Master Wuju. She once swore that if she succeeded in her cultivation, she would avenge her master. She didn't disappoint. Relying on the 6 desires heavenly domain's origin, spring white snow, her cultivation improved rapidly and reached the peak of the 2 extremities of life and death. In her opinion, Sakyamune should be a half-step heavenly law master. The gap between her and Sakyamune wasn't big. Coupled with her trump card, she knew that she might have a chance to defeat Sakyamune. After waiting for a while, Sakyamune opened his eyes and looked at the starry sky outside the temple. His eyes revealed a trace of coldness. He knew that the people from the great Brahma domain were coming. Looks like we're going to meet this little bastard again. This time, I must eliminate all future troubles. Chapter 26:20. Like water and fire, the stream of light shot out from the cold and empty starry sky at an extremely fast speed and soon landed in the divine temple. The stream of light faded away, revealing 3 figures. The one in the lead was also a peerless beauty. The woman wore a pale white robe, and her long hair draped over her waist like a stream of light. Her beautiful face revealed a cold aura. This woman's appearance was absolutely rare in the secular world. She was almost the same as Yao Xiangjuan. Moreover, this woman's temperament was too cold, like a snow lotus at the peak of a snowy mountain. On the contrary, she added a trace of charm and attraction compared to Yao Xiangjuan. The moment Sun Chi saw the woman, although he was mentally prepared, he was still dazed for a moment. He couldn't help but ask, "Are you representing the Hua Xia heavenly region or the Great Brahma heavenly region?" Sun Chi had investigated the 8 heavenly regions in advance, so he naturally knew the general situation of the 8 heavenly regions. Now that the representatives of 6 heavenly regions had come, only the Hua Xia heavenly region and the Great Brahma heavenly region were left. He asked this question. The cold woman said indifferently, "I'm representing the Great Brahma heavenly region to come to the Hu Divine Temple." Sun Chi nodded and made a gesture of invitation. The cold woman led the two people behind her to sit down naturally. Sakyamuni narrowed his eyes and stared at the cold woman. He said indifferently, "Muchen Shue, I didn't expect you to come. Is that Jun going to be a coward?" Although Sakyamuni had never met Muchen Shue, his clone Yang Yi was Muchen Shue's senior brother, so he was no stranger to Muchen Shue. Sakyamuni also found that Muchen Shue's cultivation had already reached the life and death extremes. He also didn't know why, but he felt that there was an unknown power in Muchen Shue's body. Although he felt this power, he couldn't be sure what it was. Sun Qi, on the other hand, looked at Muchen Shue differently. Sun Qi's eyes were filled with surprise, doubt, and a touch of greed. However, Sun Qi was a scheming person. He quickly hid the strange look in his eyes. The people in the temple did not notice Sun Qi's strange look. Muchen Shue coldly glanced at Sakyamuni, her brows furrowed. Although Sakyamuni's aura was faintly discernible at the moment, she could feel a shiver from Sakyamuni. Muchen Shue was very clear about her own strength. Ever since she had awakened the mysterious phoenix bloodline in her body, her cultivation speed had been extremely fast. Before Jun had left, she'd relied on the life and death pill to advance into the extremes of life and death, and she'd even relied on the heaven-defying effects of the phoenix bloodline to break through in a short period of time and attain a cultivation at the quasi-heaven Dao Lord realm. Muchen Shue was very clear about how terrifying the phoenix bloodline in her body was. Although her cultivation was only at the quasi-heaven Dao Lord realm, she was very clear that her strength was much stronger than ordinary quasi-heaven Dao Lords. As for how strong she was now, Muchen Shue herself was not very clear. After all, there were no Dao validation experts in the 8 heavens. Even quasi-heaven Dao Lords were very rare. Ever since she'd broken through to the quasi-heaven Dao Lord realm, she hadn't really fought with her full strength. Moreover, she'd already guessed that Sakyamuni would attend the invitation from the Xianmi Sky region's emissary. The reason she'd accepted the invitation so fearlessly was naturally because she was confident in her own strength. However, Muchen Shue frowned when she saw Sakyamuni. She'd noticed that Sakyamuni had the aura of a Dao validation expert. Although she'd deliberately concealed it, her perception was much stronger than ordinary cultivators. Muchen Shue hadn't expected Sakyamuni to succeed in her Dao validation. However, she wasn't afraid. Although she wasn't very clear about how strong she'd become after completely awakening her phoenix bloodline, she didn't think she'd be suppressed by Sakyamuni, who'd just attained her Dao validation. "Sakyamuni, you'd better think before you speak. My husband has something to do and can't come, so I'm temporarily acting as the ruler of the Great Brahma Sky region. Moreover, if he really comes, killing you will be as easy as blowing off dust," Muchen Shue said indifferently. The other cultivators at the table sneered when they heard Muchen Shue's words. They'd heard of Zhuowen's name and knew that he'd destroyed the Great Brahma Sky region in one move. However, they knew very well what kind of person the Great Brahma Sky region was. Not only was he ranked last among the rulers of the Sky region, but his strength was also inferior to theirs. He was only at the life enlightenment realm and could be said to be very weak. In their opinion, if they were to face the Great Brahma Sky region, they could also destroy him in one move. Therefore, Muchen Shue's words were simply nonsense to them. However, Yao Xiangjuan took another look at Muchen Shue. She hadn't expected that this beautiful woman in front of her, who wasn't any weaker than her and had an even colder temperament than her, was actually Zhuowen's Dao companion. No wonder Big Brother Zhuo couldn't forget her back then. She does have such charm. Yao Xiangjuan couldn't help but think of Zhuowen's figure in the space-time quicksand river. A trace of bitterness rose in her heart. However, it was only bitterness. She also admired Muchen Shue in her heart. Yao Xiangjuan had quite a good impression of Zhuowen, but it wasn't to the extent of falling in love with Zhuowen. Now that Zhuowen had saved his Dao companion, Yao Xiangjuan was happy for Zhuowen. In Yao Xiangjuan's opinion, she and Zhuowen were more like close friends. Sakyamuni gave a cold snort, but he didn't say anything. Chapter 26-21. Dao Root. Yao Xiangjuan's pupils shrank. It was a good thing her mind wasn't bad, so she calmed herself down and replied in a voice filled with disbelief, "This? How is this possible? It's very hard to prove one's Tao in the 8 heaven domains. Did Sakyamuni really succeed? It's definitely true. My perception is quite sharp, and when I came to the temple, I could feel a trace of Tao aura from Sakyamuni. This Tao aura is much stronger than a half-step heavenly Tao master, Mu Chenxue said in a serious voice. Yao Xiangjuan's beautiful eyes focused as she revealed a bitter look. She had relied on the heaven domain's spring white snow to increase her cultivation by leaps and bounds, reaching the peak of the life and death realm. Although she was not as strong as Sakyamuni, at least the gap between them was not that big. But she never would have thought that Sakyamuni would succeed. She knew that with her current strength, she could not compare to Sakyamuni at all. Then what should we do? With Sakyamuni's personality, he'll probably make a move after the temple conference. Yao Xiangjuan was a bit panicked. Mu Chenxue calmly said, "Little sister Xiangjuan, do you believe me? If you're willing to believe me, then follow me after the conference." Yao Xiangjuan looked up and met Mu Chenxue's calm eyes. Her panicked heart calmed down a bit as she said with a strong nod, "Big sister Chenxue, I believe you." Mu Chenxue revealed a faint smile. "You can just follow me when the time comes. Let's listen to what the envoy has to say." Yao Xiangjuan nodded and did not send any more sound transmissions. She just silently sat in front of the table. Is there no one from the Huaxia heaven domain coming? After waiting for a while, Sun Qi was a bit impatient as he coldly said. Sakyamuni also knit his brows. Huaxia heaven domain's Tai Ching had always been a large worry in his heart. Now that he had proven his Tao and his strength had increased, he naturally hoped to meet Tai Ching again and fight with him. Sakyamuni was brimming with confidence, and he wasn't particularly fearful of his greatest enemy. He believed that even if Tai Ching had a powerful trump card, the difference in cultivation couldn't be made up for by trump cards. This time, he planned to trample Tai Ching under his feet. Sun Qi waited for a while, but his face became more and more unsightly. Then he stopped waiting and walked to the main seat of the table, saying coldly, "It seems that the Tianyuan realm of Huaxia wants to test my patience. Well, since no one from the Tianyuan realm of Huaxia is coming, then forget it. I'll tell you first." Everyone at the table looked at each other, some of them gloating in their hearts. They knew that the 3 liquidators of the heaven realm of Huaxia had thoroughly offended this emissary. This emissary was a genuine Tao-confirming powerhouse. If such a powerhouse was angered, it would be very terrifying. Sakyamuni frowned slightly. Because in the Xianmi heavenly domain, all the cultivators that were able to smoothly attain the Tao possessed Tao roots within their bodies, and Tao roots could give birth to Tao veins that allowed them to continue cultivating after attaining the Tao. Tao veins could absorb the quintessence of the heavenly Tao and refine it into their own Tao aura, allowing them to become one with the heavenly Tao in battle and be able to borrow the energy of the heavenly Tao at will. It was precisely because they could borrow the energy of the heavenly Tao at any time that they were on a completely different level from cultivators below the Tao affirmation realm. This was also the reason why Tao affirmation realm experts were extremely rare in the 8 heavenly domains. Because the 8 heavenly domains didn't have a systematic method to test their Tao roots, and they didn't know how to unearth true geniuses. Coupled with the fact that the 8 heavenly domains were barren of star energy. If one wanted to cultivate and attain the Tao in the 8 heavenly domains, then it was simply 1 in a million, and the probability was simply too small. Which one of you is willing to follow me to the Xianmi heavenly domain? But let's make a deal first. I'll only take cultivators with Tao roots, and I won't take cultivators without Tao roots. Sun Qi spoke in a deep voice. Cough cough. Emissary Sun, according to what you said, the Xianmi heavenly domain can determine whether a cultivator has the talent to attain the Tao in advance, but we still have some doubts. Why don't you demonstrate it for us to see? Old man Qing Shui coughed and spoke. The others revealed curious expressions as well. This was the first time they'd heard of Tao roots. In their countless years of cultivation, the 8 heavenly domains had judged a cultivator's talent by their cultivation speed. Those who cultivated quickly naturally had high talent, and those who cultivated slowly naturally had low talent. Sakyamuni revealed a curious expression as well. This was the first time he'd heard of Tao roots as well, and he really wanted to see if any of them possessed Tao roots. Mu Chenxue and Yao Xiangjuan revealed curious expressions as well. Sun Qi flicked his finger and took out an irregular crystal from his spirit ring. Chapter 26-22. Testing the Tao Root. Tao roots are divided into grades as well, and they're respectively heaven, earth, dark, and yellow. The highest grade is the heaven grade Tao root, and the lowest is the yellow grade Tao root. It's practically impossible for those without Tao roots to attain the Tao, said Sun Qi indifferently. You go first. Sun Qi pointed at the old man as he spoke. It was this old man who'd suggested testing the Tao root. Even though the old man seemed to be old and weak, he was extremely interested in testing the Tao root. So, he stood up while a trace of spirit appeared in his muddy eyes. Place your right hand on the testing stone, said Sun Qi. The old man nodded and placed his right hand on the crystal. After that, Sun Qi started to chant, and then the translucent and crystalline testing stone started to change. The crystal emanated a trace of yellow light. However, the yellow light was extremely weak, and it was like the afterglow of dusk. It was filled with the aura of someone past their prime. It's barely in Tao root, but it's very weak. It can probably only be called a pseudo-Tao root. Sun Qi's indifferent voice resounded while his gaze carried disdain. Pseudo-Tao roots could be found everywhere in the Xianmi heavenly region. It was very difficult for cultivators that possessed pseudo-Tao roots to attain the Tao by themselves unless a great figure spent a great deal of effort to help them attain the Tao by force. However, this was an arduous and unrewarding task. After a cultivator with a pseudo-Tao root was forcefully attained by a great figure, their cultivation would forever remain at the Heaven Tao Lord realm, and they would be unable to advance in their entire lifetime, let alone break through. However, Sun Qi didn't reveal his disdain. After all, the old man was the person in charge of the Tusita heavenly region. If Sun Qi wanted to recruit people from the Tusita heavenly region, then he had to rely on the old man's ability to rally people. The old man frowned when he saw the results of the test. Obviously, he wasn't satisfied with the results. It was obvious that the old man's natural talent was very ordinary, and it was probably very difficult for him to attain the Tao. After that, Sun Qi went to test the Tao roots of the three people in charge of the Boundless Radiance heavenly region, Yama heavenly region, and Mahesvara heavenly region. He noticed that they were only slightly stronger than the old man and had barely attained the yellow grade Tao root. Let me give it a try. Yao Xiangjuan was very interested and started to test it as well. The crystal suddenly emitted a blazing yellow light, and when the yellow light reached its peak, it suddenly changed into a cyan color. Although the green light wasn't as intense as the yellow light, it was still dazzling enough. Sun Qi's eyes lit up, and he gazed at Yao Xiangjuan with pleasant surprise as he said, "It's actually a profound grade ancestral Tao root. Miss Yao, it's truly a waste of your natural talent not to head to the Dark Valley heavenly region. Come back with me, and my White Rainbow Hall will definitely place emphasis on fostering you. In the future, your cultivation will at least be at the level of Lord Chaotic, and perhaps you'll be able to break through to the second step of the Tao validation." Yao Xiangjuan's beautiful eyes were also filled with excitement, but she quickly calmed down and said, "If you can help me kill Sakyamuni, why can't I follow you back to the White Rainbow Hall in the Xianmi heavenly region?" Sun Qi's brows knit together tightly. Sakyamuni was the person he thought highly of the most. As far as he was concerned, Sakyamuni's ancestral Tao root was at least at the profound grade, and he naturally didn't want to miss the opportunity to recruit such a genius, let alone deal with Sakyamuni. Yao Xiangjuan noticed Sun Qi's dilemma as well, and she grunted coldly before sitting back down without saying a word. Sun Qi was slightly helpless, yet his gaze descended onto Mu Chenxue, and there was a different expression in the depths of his eyes. "Miss Imo, would you like to take the test as well?" asked Sun Qi. Mu Chenxue refused resolutely. "There's no need. I'm clearly aware of whether I possess a spirit vein or not." Sun Qi glanced deeply at Mu Chenxue, yet he didn't force her. He looked at Sakyamuni instead because amongst all of them, he was actually the one who looked forward to Sakyamuni's ancestral Tao root the most. "I'll take the test as well." Sakyamuni nodded, and then he walked over to Sun Qi and covered the crystal with his right palm. In just an instant, yellow light shot into the sky, and then the yellow light swiftly changed into green light. Moreover, the green light grew more and more dazzling, and it even surpassed the intensity of the green light Yao Xiangjuan emitted during her test. Sun Qi's eyes lit up, and then he noticed to his pleasant surprise that the bright light suddenly shot into the sky and slowly turned brown. Only when the color had completely turned brown did the light slowly recede. Sakyamuni frowned slightly. The crystal had only changed color 3 times, yet ancestral Tao roots had 4 grades. In other words, his ancestral Tao root could only be considered to be an earthly grade ancestral Tao root, and it hadn't attained the heavenly grade. However, Sun Qi was truly shocked. He hadn't expected that Sakyamuni's natural talent would be so formidable and actually possess an earthly grade ancestral Tao root. After all, earthly grade ancestral Tao roots were 100% capable of stepping into the second step of the Tao advancement so long as one didn't perish on the way. I must take this fellow into the White Rainbow Hall, no matter the cost. Sun Qi's eyes revealed a wisp of bright light, and his gaze towards Sakyamuni grew even brighter. At the same time, there was a wisp of gloominess in his gaze. He was very clearly aware that he'd already occupied the initiative when he came to the 8 great heavens this time, and he was absolutely unwilling to let such a genius like Sakyamuni slip by. If Chenxi was taken by another power, then it would absolutely be a huge loss to the White Rainbow Hall. He decided to invite Sakyamuni again. If Sakyamuni didn't know what was good for him, then he could only make a move and annihilate Sakyamuni. After all, annihilating such a genius with his own hands was better than falling into the hands of another power. Sakyamuni's perception was extremely acute, and he'd sensed Sun Qi's killing intent at the instant he revealed it. Sakyamuni thought for a moment and understood Sun Qi's thoughts at this moment. Sakyamuni, so long as you agree to join the White Rainbow Hall, then I promise that you'll definitely become the successor of the White Rainbow Hall in the future. Besides that, I've already sent a message to our hall master regarding your matters, and he's willing to make you the successor. Sun Qi suppressed the excitement in his heart and extended another invitation to Sakyamuni. Sakyamuni fell into silence. He was very clearly aware that if he refused again, then he would stand on the opposite side of Sun Qi, and that was absolutely unwise. After all, he'd just attained the Tao, and his cultivation hadn't stabilized. Moreover, Sun Qi had attained the Tao much longer than him, and Sun Qi possessed many trump cards. If they really fought, then Sakyamuni knew that he wasn't a match for Sun Qi at this moment. Sakyamuni was silent for a moment, but then he smiled and said, "I'm honored to join the White Rainbow Hall." Sun Qi was startled. He didn't expect Sakyamuni, who'd tactfully refused him before, to agree so readily now. He was overjoyed and didn't think about the contrast between Sakyamuni's attitude before and after. Sakyamuni, don't worry, if you join our White Rainbow Hall, we'll do our best to cultivate you in the future and help you step into the second step of Tao validation as soon as possible. Sun Qi laughed. Sakyamuni just nodded slightly, but then he looked at Mu Chenxue and Yao Xiangjuan and said with a smile, "Senior brother Sun, when the time comes, you're welcome to come to the Sakyamuni domain to recruit people, but before that, I may have to deal with some grievances." Sun Qi was startled, but he quickly recovered and looked at Mu Chenxue and Yao Xiangjuan and said with a smile, "Do you need my help?" Sakyamuni grinned and said, "There's no need to trouble senior brother Sun with such trivial matters." Yao Xiangjuan and Mu Chenxue's expressions changed drastically. They didn't expect such a thing to happen. Looking at Sun Qi's appearance, they were afraid that he was going to help Sakyamuni. Elder Qing Lao and the other 3 naturally didn't have any objections. They gathered around Sun Qi and stared fixedly at Sakyamuni, Mu Chenxue, and Yao Xiangjuan. They had a feeling that Sakyamuni wasn't simple. Especially when Sakyamuni stood up, the Taoist rhyme emanated was extremely powerful. Even though it wasn't as powerful as Sun Qi's, it wasn't too far off. Could it be that Sakyamuni has succeeded? Elder Qing Lao was surprised and bewildered as he muttered with a frown on his face. "Sakyamuni, you killed Palace Master Wujue and destroyed my 6 Desires Palace for no reason. You're truly too ruthless." Palace Master Jing Yun glared at Sakyamuni furiously. Sakyamuni sneered and casually slapped out a palm towards Palace Master Jingyun. Even though the golden palm was only around 3 meters in size, the aura on it was extremely terrifying. Especially the Taoist rhyme that emanated from it, it seemed to be able to affect one's mind. Palace Master Jingyun's expression changed drastically. She actually trembled in front of the golden palm and couldn't muster up any thoughts of resistance. "Uncle Master Jingyun, watch out!" Yao Xiangjuan cried out and stood in front of Jingyun. She formed a seal with her jade-like hands and slapped the empty space. Immediately, the empty space distorted and surged out like a torrent, smashing against the golden palm. Boom! The golden palm was stopped by this invisible force for a moment. However, it was quickly crushed by the invisible force and continued to attack Yao Xiangjuan. Yao Xiangjuan gritted her teeth and her entire body was wrapped in milky white energy. Then, the milky white light condensed and turned into a 3-foot-6-inch guqin. This guqin was the heavenly domain's heavenly domain source, spring white snow. Yao Xiangjuan's jade-like hands gently plucked the strings of the guqin. Waves of guqin music surged out and slammed into the golden palm. Then, Yao Xiangjuan kept plucking the strings of the guqin. The waves of guqin music were more terrifying and powerful than the previous one, and Yao Xiangjuan kept retreating. When she retreated nearly 100 steps, she stepped on the ground and plucked the strings of the guqin again. Suddenly, the guqin music was earth-shattering. Like a violent storm, it slammed into the golden palm. The golden palm, which had been weakened by the guqin music again and again, completely collapsed into countless golden light spots under the last wave of guqin music. Yao Xiangjuan's face was pale, and a trace of blood flowed from the corner of her mouth. Her beautiful eyes were full of horror. She didn't expect that Sakyamuni's casual move would force her to use all her strength to barely block it. "You have indeed succeeded in proving your way," Yao Xiangjuan said gloomily. Palace Master Jingyun hurried to Yao Xiangjuan with an apologetic look in her eyes. At the same time, she also regretted it. If she had known that Sakyamuni had already proven his way, she wouldn't have asked Yao Xiangjuan to accept Sun Qi's invitation. Yao Xiangjuan comforted her softly, indicating that this matter didn't matter. At this moment, Mu Chenxue came to Yao Xiangjuan's side and asked, "Little sister Xiangjuan, are you all right?" Yao Xiangjuan forced a smile and said, "I'm fine. I'm just a little injured. It's nothing serious." Mu Chenxue shook her head. Although Yao Xiangjuan's injuries didn't seem serious, Mu Chenxue could sense that Yao Xiangjuan's injuries weren't light. She had already suffered serious internal injuries. "Vizumao, the two of you take little sister Xiangjuan and retreat," Mu Chenxue said in a deep voice. Yuezu and Magatama, who had been following behind Mu Chenxue, exchanged glances. Both of them could see the worry in their eyes. Although they knew that Mu Chenxue's cultivation was very high and she was very strong, as far as they knew, Mu Chenxue was only a half-step Heavenly Tao Master. She was still half a step away from becoming a Heavenly Tao Master. Although it was only half a step, it was like a heavenly moat that was unreachable. They didn't know that Yao Xiangjuan could barely take a casual move from Sakyamuni. They knew that Mu Chenxue was stronger than Yao Xiangjuan, but no matter how strong she wasn't a true Heavenly Tao Master. However, this was Mu Chenxue's order after all, so they had no choice but to obey. Big Sister Chenxue isn't Sakyamuni's match. I'll go with Big Sister Chenxue, Yao Xiangjuan quickly said. However, as soon as Yao Xiangjuan finished speaking, she looked at Mu Chenxue's back in front of her in shock. She saw that Mu Chenxue's body was surrounded by flowing flames. Following the clear cry of a phoenix, Mu Chenxue's aura began to increase, becoming more and more terrifying. The flowing flames quickly moved around Mu Chenxue's body. It was like a cycle of reincarnation, condensing into the image of a phoenix. Mu Chenxue was inside the fire phoenix. It was like she was wearing a beautiful coat of fire phoenix. She suddenly soared into the sky and charged at Sakyamuni. Chapter 26-24. A sword soared through the sky. Sakyamuni was surprised by Mu Chenxue's aura that had suddenly risen explosively. This aura was so strong that it was practically on par with his own aura. What's going on with Mu Chenxue? How many years has it been since we last met? She's actually changed so much. Sakyamune thought in his heart as he took a step forward. Golden light erupted from his entire body, and he seemed like a golden statue that was covered in golden armor. Rumble! Sakyamune instantly flashed over, and his fist was like a rainbow that shot through the sky, and it smashed towards Mu Chenxue's chest. Mu Chenxue's beautiful eyes were cold while flames flowed throughout her body. She opened her palm and lightly stretched it out. The flames that covered her palm possessed an extremely terrifying temperature, and the surrounding air was scorched to the point of being distorted and collapsed. Bang! Their attacks collided, and it caused a terrifying airflow to arise. Space collapsed endlessly, and strong winds swept through the surroundings like the sharpest blade. The entire Hue Divine Temple shook violently under the terrifying wave of air, and it seemed like it would collapse at any moment. The four of them let out muffled groans as they retreated incessantly, and they directly retreated to the edge of the temple. If it wasn't for the barrier that Sun Qi had set up at the edge of the temple, all four of them would have been blasted out of the temple. It wasn't just the old man, the four of them on Yao Xiangjuan's side were in an extremely sorry state as well. Only Sun Qi stood on the spot without moving with his hands behind his back, and he stared unblinkingly at the battle before him. Sakyamune and Mu Chenxue each took over 10 steps back, and both of them revealed solemn expressions. I underestimated you. Your cultivation is at most at the half-step Heavenly Tao Lord, but the bloodline in your body isn't ordinary, and it's actually capable of improving your combat strength to such a terrifying extent. Sakura spoke coldly. Mu Chenxue's beautiful eyes were cold as she said, I didn't expect you to have successfully attained your Tao. Originally, I came here with the intention of killing you, but I didn't expect such an unforeseen event to occur. Sakyamune laughed and said, My goal is similar to yours. I came here to kill that Zhuan. Unfortunately, not only is that guy a coward, he even asked a woman to stand up for him. Calling him a coward is too apartment. You're not allowed to insult my husband. You're courting death. Mu Chenxue's beautiful eyes were filled with killing intent. She stomped her foot and swept towards Sakyamune like a waterfall across the sky. The Phoenix Phantom let out a deafening and clear cry. Invisible sound waves spread out and actually affected the barrier set up by Sun Qi. Bang bang bang. Sakyamune and Mu Chenxue fought once more, and the aftershock from their battle grew more and more terrifying. It actually affected the entire Hue Divine Temple and the barrier in the surroundings. On the other hand, Yao Xiangjuan and the others resisted the aftershock with great difficulty, and they watched with shock as the battle between Mu Chenxue and Sakyamune continued. How formidable! Yao Xiangjuan gazed at Mu Chenxue's figure with shock. She hadn't expected that Zhuowen's Tao companion would actually be so formidable. She'd seen Zhuowen fight in the past, and the gap between Zhuowen and Mu Chenxue wasn't just a little bit. Of course, Yao Xiangjuan hadn't seen Zhuowen for a very long time, so she was naturally unaware that Zhuowen's strength had advanced by leaps and bounds during this period of time. Especially Zhuowen's King Devourer, his strength had arrived at a freakish state. Suddenly, countless cracks appeared on the surface of Hue Divine Temple, and even the barrier around it started to shatter and collapse. Rumble! The Hue Divine Temple finally couldn't withstand the battle between Sakyamune and Yao Xiangjuan, and it completely collapsed. The barrier around it was also completely shattered. Qing Jiao and the others quickly escaped from the Hue Divine Temple, and they looked at the ruins of the Hue Divine Temple with lingering fear. Yao Xiangjuan had already led Jing Yun, Yuezhu, and Magatama out of the Hue Divine Temple in advance. Bang! After the 8 of them left the Hue Divine Temple, the ruins of the Hue Divine Temple suddenly exploded, and Mu Chenxue and Sakyamune fought like ferocious beasts again. It was an earth-shattering battle, and the sun and moon seemed to have lost their light. The battle was extremely terrifying. Sun Qi waved his hand, and the ruins above were easily dispersed by him. He quietly watched the battle between Mu Chenxue and Sakyamune, and his eyes flickered, as if he was weighing something. Boom! Mu Chenxue and Sakyamune separated again, and the contempt on Sakyamuni's face was no longer present. He looked deeply at Mu Chenxue and said, "Mu Chenxue, your strength is not bad, and you are qualified to receive my strongest attack. Once I've killed you, I'll naturally go look for Zhuowen and kill him as well, so as to avoid future troubles." At this point, Sakyamuni's killing intent soared to the sky, and immediately, behind Sakyamuni, golden rings of light appeared, densely packed, and there were thousands of them. From these golden rings of light, various powerful divine weapons flew out, and each of them was shining with a golden light, and it was difficult to look at them directly. Thousands of golden divine weapons rushed towards Mu Chenxue like a flood. From afar, it looked like a golden river, and it was extremely magnificent. Mu Chenxue was not to be outdone. The phoenix silhouette on her grew even more solid, and then Mu Chenxue stepped into the air, and terrifying flames spread in all directions, immediately turning into a sea of fire. Bang! 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 The golden river collided with the boundless sea of fire, and dazzling sparks erupted. Sakyamuni sneered. He formed a seal with both hands, and suddenly pointed with his right hand. Immediately, the golden river pierced through the sea of fire like a rainbow, and directly blasted towards Mu Chenxue's heart. Mu Chenxue's expression changed slightly, but she did not panic. Instead, she pointed at her forehead with her right hand, and the mark of a flaming phoenix appeared on her forehead. Afterwards, the boundless sea of fire in the surroundings actually began to change, and formed silhouettes of phoenixes. Although these silhouettes of phoenixes were much smaller than the ones on Mu Chenxue's body, their power could not be underestimated. The silhouettes of phoenixes were like moths to a flame, and they completely blocked the terrifying attack of the golden river. Sakyamuni frowned slightly, and snorted coldly. He took a step forward, and followed the golden river into the sea of fire. Afterwards, he formed a seal with his right hand, and shouted, "Condense!" The silhouettes of golden divine weapons fused together, and in the end, they landed in Sakyamuni's hand. At a closer look, the weapon in Sakyamuni's hand shone with golden light, and it seemed like a sword, but it was not a sword. The hilt of the weapon was golden, but the blade was blood red, and the blade was covered in dense runes. This is the Emperor sword that I have refined for countless years, and after fusing with countless void sky divine weapons, it finally took shape. The moment I confirmed my Tao, it also comprehended its own Tao, and became a Tao-confirming divine weapon. Today, I will use you as a sacrifice to my sword. Sakyamuni gently stroked the divine sword in his hand, and then with a wave of his hand, the silhouettes of phoenixes that surged towards him were instantly destroyed. Bang! 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 Sakyamuni swung his sword again, and all the silhouettes of phoenixes in front of him could not stop his sword at all. A sword across the sky, and there was nothing it could not destroy. Chapter 26-25. I'm here to kill you. This is bad, big sister Chenxue. Yao Xiangjuan saw this scene and couldn't help calling out. Uezu and Magatama both revealed looks of worry. The strength Sakyamuni displayed was too terrifying. They were all worried that Mu Chenxue wouldn't be able to block Sakyamuni's strongest attack. Mu Chenxue knitted her brows as a solemn expression appeared in her beautiful eyes. Soon after, she clenched her jade-like hand. Immediately, the surrounding phoenix phantoms merged into her body, causing the phoenix phantoms on her body to become even more solid and powerful. When Sakyamuni's sword slashed down, the aura of the phoenix phantoms reached its strongest point. Flames and golden light intertwined, and a terrifying light filled the entire starry sky. Mu Chenxue and Sakyamuni's figures were covered in this light, and no one could tell who had won or lost. However, the moment the light surged out, Sun Qi's eyes burst out with an intense light. Immediately after, he stomped his right foot and quietly swept into the light. At this moment, in the center of the light, Mu Chenxue and Sakyamuni were in a difficult stalemate. Sakyamuni's brows tightly knit. He never thought that Mu Chenxue would be this strong. He had already used his strongest attack, but he had only gained the upper hand. He still wasn't strong enough to defeat Mu Chenxue. Sakyamuni seemed to have sensed something. He looked to the side and saw a figure quickly flying over. Then a palm flew out and slammed towards Mu Chenxue. When Mu Chenxue sensed this palm, her expression completely changed. She wanted to pull out her hand to block this palm, but it was a pity that she was in a stalemate with Sakyamune and couldn't pull out her hand at all. In the end, Mu Chenxue could only watch as the palm broke through her defense and landed on her chest. However, Mu Chenxue also moved her body at the last moment. The palm that was originally on her chest finally landed on her shoulder. Puchi. The powerful Taoist rhyme stirred inside Mu Chenxue's body like a meat grinder. Then, Mu Chenxue flew out like a leaf. When the light completely disappeared, Yao Xiangjuan and the others saw Mu Chenxue's figure flying out. Then, they saw a stalwart figure standing beside Sakyamune. This figure was Sun Qi. Despicable! When Yao Xiangjuan saw this scene, she immediately thought of what had just happened. She stomped her foot and rushed towards Mu Chenxue, trying to catch Mu Chenxue's body. At this moment, all the meridians in Mu Chenxue's body were being attacked by Sun Qi's Taoist rhyme. Her body was weak and she couldn't move at all. If Sakyamune gave her another blow, she would definitely die. Sakyamune just looked at Sun Qi coldly and didn't say anything. Instead, he held the divine sword in his right hand and casually slashed at Mu Chenxue. The blood-red sword light mixed with gold rushed towards Mu Chenxue. Chapter 26-26. Zhuan vs. Sakyamune, Brother Zhuo. Yao Xiangjuan and the others quietly came to Zhuowen's side. Among them, Yao Xiangjuan looked at Zhuowen worriedly. She could also see that Zhuowen's current cultivation was only at the death enlightenment state. Although she knew that Zhuowen's combat strength was extraordinary, the gap between the death enlightenment state and the heavenly Tao master was too big. No matter how heaven-defying Zhuowen was, it was impossible for him to cross the entire realm and fight against Sakyamune, who was at the heavenly Tao master level. Palace Master Jing Yun, Magatama, and Yuezu also looked worried. Their thoughts were similar to Yao Xiangjuan's. They did not think that Zhuowen, who was only at the death enlightenment state, would be a match for Sakyamune. However, Sun Qi was watching them closely. It was unrealistic for them to escape. After all, in front of an expert like Sun Qi, they could not escape at all. Sun Qi stared at Zhuowen with great interest. The disdain in his eyes became even more intense. He did not take Zhuowen, who was only at the death enlightenment state, seriously. What he cared about was that this little guy, who was only at the death enlightenment state, dared to be so arrogant in front of Sakyamune, who was a heavenly Tao master. In Sun Qi's view, Zhuowen's behavior was simply a brainless act of seeking death. Husband, Sakyamune has successfully attained the Tao. Mu Chenxue said worriedly. However, before Mu Chenxue could finish her words, she coughed and spat out a mouthful of blood. Her beautiful face was as pale as snow. Zhuowen quickly took out a level 9 divine healing pill from his spirit ring and gave it to Mu Chenxue. The latter's complexion became better, but the injuries in her body were too serious. She would need a long time to recuperate. Ever since Zhuowen became a Tier 9 alchemist, concocting Tier 9 divine pills was basically a piece of cake for him. In addition, he had inherited the alchemy Tao of the Emperor Pillfire, so the Tier 9 divine pills he concocted were all of unique quality. They were much stronger than ordinary Tier 9 divine pills. Chenxue, today, I'll cut off Sakyamune's for you, Zhuowen said with a smile. Mu Chenxue when she saw the confident smile on. Although she knew that Zhuowen's cultivation death enlightenment state, she was surprisingly confident in Zhuowen. Although she knew that Zhuowen's, she was still, Mu Chenxue. She had never doubted Zhuowen. Along the way, she was very clear about what Zhuowen had gone through. He had suffered much more than her. Zhuowen's words were never empty words. After Zhuowen handed Mu Chenxue over to Yao Xiangjuan and told her to take good care of Mu Chenxue, he walked towards Sakyamune step by step. Yao Xiangjuan's expression was complicated. She wanted to persuade Zhuowen, but thinking about their current situation, she knew that anything she said would be in vain. Because whether Zhuowen fought or not, it was not up to them. Sakyamune would definitely not let them go, so they had to fight even if they didn't want to. Sakyamuni stared at Jun indifferently as if he was looking at a clown. He said nonchalantly, "Have you finished saying your last words to your little lover? If you're done, come and die." With that, Sakyamuni casually waved his right hand. A golden halo of light appeared on his right hand, and a shining god artifact shot out, directly towards Jun. Jun wielded the Sacrifice of Death sword in his right hand and swung it violently. The Sacrifice of Death sword shot through space, slamming towards the shining god artifact. Rumble! The Sacrificial Death sword was too powerful. The moment the golden divine tool came into contact with the Sacrificial Death sword, it was immediately contaminated by the terrifying death energy of the Sacrificial Death sword. Its surface dimmed, and then it exploded. The Sacrifice of Death sword continued onwards, heading straight for Sakyamuni. Sakyamuni also knew that Zhuowen's divine artifact was not simple. After discovering that the halo of light he had summoned was ineffective against it, he did not dare to be careless. Halos of light immediately appeared behind him. Bush, 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 bush. All kinds of god artifacts shot out of the halos like rain. The only similarity between them was that they were all shining with golden light, as if they were draped in the afterglow of the sun. Zhuowen held the Thunderfire sword in one hand and the Blood Immortal sword in the other. He kicked off the void with his right foot and shot out like an arrow, following behind the Sacrifice of Death sword. Countless golden lights were densely packed. Space and time had already been annihilated wherever the golden lights shrouded. The starry sky was distorted, turning into a terrifying zone. Sakyamuni crossed his arms and looked at the dazzling starry sky before him with a mocking smile. Zhuowen's possession of a divine artifact was indeed beyond his expectations. However, how much power could a cultivator who had yet to prove his Tao be able to unleash? Zhuowen had merely comprehended the state of death. In Sakyamuni's eyes, he was much less of a threat than Mu Chenxue. Rip. The moment Sakyamuni's lips curled into a smile, a huge crack appeared on the surface of the endless golden light. It was like a piece of cloth that had been cut open. A divine sword filled with a gray death aura shot out. Zhuowen held the sword with both hands and followed closely behind the divine sword like a god or a demon. Interesting. A little guy who has comprehended the state of death can actually remain unscathed under such an attack. In the distance, Sun Qi raised his eyebrows. He was a little surprised that Zhuowen had actually broken through Sakyamuni's attack. Although Sakyamuni had not used his strongest attack, it was already terrifying enough. Even a true heavenly law master would have to take it seriously. How could Sun Qi not be surprised that such an attack could not directly kill this ant who had comprehended the state of death? Sakyamuni's face darkened. He looked at the Sacrificial Death sword in front of Zhuowen and was moved. He had underestimated the divine weapon in Zhuowen's hand. Sakyamuni had never thought that Zhuowen, whose cultivation level was only at the state of death, would have the strength to contend with him. Therefore, he attributed all his guesses to the Sacrificial Death sword in Zhuowen's hand. Slash! Sakyamuni formed a seal with his right hand. Suddenly, countless golden lights gathered in his right hand. He began to use the move that he had used against Mu Chenxue earlier. Countless golden lights gathered in his palm and finally formed a golden sword hilt. Then, blood-red patterns gushed out from the end of the sword hilt. Sakyamuni held the sword hilt and suddenly slashed at Zhuowen. Instantly, countless sword rays shot out like a boundless galaxy and smashed into the Sacrificial Death sword. Bang! The Sacrificial Death sword, which had been unstoppable, suddenly stopped moving forward. Sakyamuni sneered and said, "That's it. You can only rely on this divine weapon to possess this level of strength." As he spoke, Sakyamuni had already shuttled through the golden light. Step by step, he moved so fast that it was as if he had teleported. In an instant he appeared in front of Zhuowen. Sakyamuni swung the divine sword in his hand and blocked the Sacrificial Death sword. Then he stabbed directly at Zhuowen's vital points. Oh no! Yao Xiangjuan's beautiful eyes narrowed when she saw this scene. She was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. Yuezu, Magatama, and Palace Master Jingyun all sighed. They knew that Zhuowen was no match for Sakyamuni. Zhuowen was already at his wits' end. If nothing unexpected happened, Sakyamuni's sword would be enough to severely injure Zhuowen or even kill him on the spot. Mu Chenxue watched all of this silently. Her eyes were fixed on Zhuowen's face. She could feel the confidence and fearlessness in Zhuowen's eyes. Chapter 26-27. Zhuowen's Promise, Slaughtering Dao Finger. Zhuowen pointed with his right finger. Instantly, the surrounding heavenly energy gathered at the tip of his finger. Then, Zhuowen pointed with his right finger and a huge invisible finger appeared above his head. The invisible finger exuded a terrifying aura as it blocked in front of Zhuowen. Sakyamuni stood on the invisible finger with his sword. Then, he felt as if there were countless mountains pressing down on his hand. His right hand could not help but tremble. Thump, thump, thump. Sakyamuni groaned and could not help but take dozens of steps back. He looked at the huge finger formed by the invisible heavenly energy in shock. Borrowing the power of the heavenly energy? Isn't this the technique of a Tao affirmation expert? You're just an ant that has comprehended the death state. How can you have such a technique? Sakyamuni's face darkened as he looked at Zhuowen in disbelief. Unfortunately, Zhuowen did not care about Sakyamuni at all. The formed slaughtering Tao finger pierced through the air, wanting to completely crush Sakyamuni. Sakyamuni naturally could not sit still and wait for death. He roared and slashed out with the divine weapon in his hand. Terrifying sword chi filled the air. Every sword chi was terrifying enough to destroy any star system. Sakura blasted out a total of 10 swords, and finally, that terrifying slaying Tao finger was completely annihilated and dispersed. Zhuowen sighed inwardly. The tyrannical slaughtering Tao technique was extremely terrifying. The slaughtering Tao finger was a terrifying secret technique that could even kill a heavenly Tao master. Although Zhuowen had cultivated the slaughtering Tao finger to the extreme, his cultivation was still too low. The slaughtering Tao finger he formed had yet to reach the terrifying power of its peak. If Zhuowen had advanced to the life and death state and used the slaughtering Tao finger again, it would be easy for him to kill Sakyamuni, who had just attained the Tao and had not even consolidated his cultivation. Let's see what other moves you have. I think you can only use such a powerful technique once. After destroying the slaughtering Tao finger, Sakyamuni wiped off the cold sweat on his forehead. He did not expect Zhuowen to have such a powerful trump card. If Zhuowen could use the slaughtering Tao finger a few more times, he knew that it would be difficult for him to block it. However, Sakyamuni also knew that such a powerful technique skill art finger Zhuowen was only in the death realm. It was already very difficult for him to use this move once, let alone multiple times. Moreover, Sakura even saw that Zhuowen's face was slightly pale. Obviously, this move was indeed a huge burden on him. That was Tao. Zhuowen smirked when he saw Sakyamuni charging at him again. He knew that the fish had taken the bait. When Sakyamuni was 100 meters away from Zhuowen, Sakyamuni's eyebrows twitched, and his expression changed drastically. The twitching of his eyebrows meant that something dangerous was about to happen. This was one of Sakyamuni's talents. After all, the vertical bar between his eyebrows was very sensitive to danger. Boom, boom. Not waiting for Sakura to react, Zhuowen, who was in front of him, had already pointed out his finger once again, and moreover, he had continuously pointed out 4 times in the void. In an instant, 4 slaughtering fingers of Tao swept through the air, splitting into 4 different directions as they headed straight for Sakyamuni. Sakyamuni happened to be in the middle of the 4 slaughtering Tao fingers, so there was basically no way out. He could only face the 4 terrifying slaughtering Tao fingers head-on. Is this guy trying to trick me? Sakyamuni's eyes widened. He could see the mockery in Zhuowen's eyes. He knew that Zhuowen was just putting on an act for him. Bang, bang, bang. The 4 slaughtering Tao fingers were extremely fast. They landed on Sakyamuni's body in an instant. Sakyamuni fought with his life on the line. Golden light burst out from his body, and the golden vertical bar between his eyebrows split open, hoping to block Zhuowen's slaughtering Tao fingers. The power of the 4 slaughtering Tao fingers was extremely terrifying. Amidst the endless golden light, apart from the ear-piercing explosions, there was only Sakyamuni's miserable shrieks. Not good. Sun Chi, who was watching the show calmly from the side, realized that the situation was bad at the instant Zhuan executed the 4 slaughtering Dao fingers. He took a step forward and flashed explosively towards Sakyamune. Unfortunately, he was quite a distance away from Sakyamune, and Sakyamune was quite a distance away from Zhuan. When he arrived, the 4 slaughtering Dao fingers had already erupted, and he could clearly hear Sakyamune's miserable shrill cries. "Bastard!" Sun Chi's expression was unsightly while hesitation appeared in his eyes. The might emanated by the 4 slaughtering Dao fingers gave him a dangerous feeling. He knew that if he charged in just like that, then he would definitely be injured. However, Sakyamune was a genius that possessed an earth-rank ancestral Dao root, and he was even willing to join the Baihong Hall. Sun Chi wasn't willing to watch as Sakyamune perished before him. "Little bastard! Just you wait!" Sun Chi glanced fiercely at Zhuan, and then he plunged into the terrifying energy that erupted from the slaughtering Dao fingers. "All of you leave this place first." Zhuan spoke to Yao Xiangjuan and the others with a pale countenance. After executing the 4 slaughtering Dao fingers, Zhuan's countenance couldn't help but turn pale as well because it consumed quite a bit of his strength. "Let's go together." Yao Xiangjuan gazed at Zhuan as she spoke. Even though Zhuan's sudden execution of the 4 slaughtering Dao fingers to heavily injure Sakyamune had exceeded Yao Xiangjuan's expectations, it wasn't just Sakyamune who was here, and Sun Chi was here as well. Sun Chi wasn't a rookie like Sakyamune that had just stepped foot into the Heaven Dao Lord realm. Sun Chi had been a Heaven Dao Lord for a few thousand years, and his strength was much more formidable than a rookie like Sakyamune. Moreover, Sun Chi had come from the Xianmi heavenly realm, so he definitely possessed extremely powerful mystical powers. Yao Xiangjuan didn't think that Zhuan had any chance of winning against Sun Chi. However, Zhuan shook his head and said, "If I don't cut off Sakyamune's head today, I don't intend to give up." Yao Xiangjuan's brows furrowed in anger, and she couldn't help but glance at Mu Chenxue. She knew that this was a promise that Zhuan had made to Mu Chenxue. As long as Mu Chenxue persuaded Zhuan, the latter would definitely stop. Mu Chenxue smiled faintly and said, "My husband is an indomitable spirit, and his words carry enormous weight. Since he said that he would be able to cut off Sakyamune's head, then he definitely can do it. I believe in him." Yao Xiangjuan faltered, and then fell silent, her beautiful eyes filled with complex emotions. This was her first time discovering that the gap between her and Mu Chenxue was very large. She didn't understand Zhuan at all. When she met a problem, it wasn't that she didn't choose to believe in Zhuan, but rather she was worried about letting Zhuan escape with her, but she didn't understand Zhuan's true intentions and methods. Mu Chenxue was different from her. No matter what decision Zhuan made, she would wholeheartedly support and trust him. "Big brother Zhua, be careful. We'll be waiting for your good news. Also, I'll help you look after big sister Chenxue. You have to fulfill big sister Chenxue's promise." Chapter 26-28. Sun Chi makes a move. Seeing Yao Xiangjuan, Mu Chenxue, and the others leave, Zhuan turned around and gloomily stared at the figure leaping out of the energy whirlpool. This figure was Sun Chi. At this moment, Sun Chi looked at the severely injured Sakyamune beside him with an ugly expression. Even he had suffered some injuries. This kid must have used a divine ability, and an extremely powerful one at that. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to borrow the power of the heavenly way. Sun Chi put down Sakyamune, took out a green pill from his spirit ring, and fed it to Sakyamune. Seeing Sakyamune swallow the pill, Sun Chi's eyes showed a trace of pain. This was a divine pill of the heavenly way. Even he only had one on him. If it weren't for Sakyamune's terrifying talent, he wouldn't have been willing to give such a precious pill to Sakyamune. After taking the pill, Sakyamune coughed up a pool of blood. Immediately after, his body shone with a faint green light, and his injuries healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. Of course, Sakyamune's injuries were too severe. He was almost on the verge of death. Although the effects of the pill were obvious, it couldn't completely heal Sakyamune's injuries. However, Sakyamune slowly woke up from his coma. As if realizing something, Sakyamune's face darkened. His eyes were filled with rage. Then he looked at Tun, who was hovering in the air nearby, and the fury in his eyes burned even more. Zhuan, what else can you do apart from using some dirty tricks? Sakyamuni said coldly. I can still kill you. Zhuan sneered and took a step forward. Like a streak of light, he streaked across the starry sky towards Sakyamuni. The death sacrifice sword was filled with the aura of death. Sakyamuni's expression changed slightly. His current condition was extremely poor. Facing Zhuan was simply courting death. Fortunately, Sun Qi was by his side. He knew that he was now a disciple of Bai Hong Hall, and Sun Qi valued him greatly. Sun Qi wouldn't ignore him. How dare you touch a disciple of my White Rainbow Hall? Sun Qi snorted and threw a punch, smashing it in front of Zhuan. The moment the punch death sacrifice sword, a terrifying heavenly way power force rippled, and then formed a powerful vortex, it actually squeezed on Zhuan. The death sacrifice sword was blown away, and Zhuan had retreated. However, he was still hit by the aftershock of the punch. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth, and he was slightly injured. A mere ant in the death enlightenment state actually has such powerful combat strength. You must have a big secret. Sun Qi snorted coldly, took a step forward, and rushed straight over, punching towards Zhuan, every punch erupting with terrifying heavenly Tao energy. Zhuan could only rely on the death sacrifice sword to barely resist Sun Qi's attack. He was secretly shocked by Sun Qi's strength. Although Sun Qi was only a heavenly way master, he was much stronger than Sakyamuni. In particular, the heavenly way power used in each of his punches was much more terrifying than the Nadi Shivas. Zhuan was instantly at a disadvantage. Sun Qi became more and more shocked as the battle went on. If he was facing an ordinary death enlightenment state cultivator, he would have killed him with one punch. However, the white-clothed young man in front of him had actually withstood more than 10 moves from him. Although it was because of the death sacrifice sword, it was already very amazing. An ordinary death enlightenment state cultivator could not do this. Thinking of this, Sun Qi felt that Zhuan must have a big secret. He must kill him, then take his spirit ring and check it. On the space-time roulette, Blood Scale sat cross-legged and silently looked at Zhuan, who was at a disadvantage. He had no intention of making a move. I say, you should be the king of the Devouring Clan, right? I smell the aura of the Devouring Clan on you. The green-haired mummy looked bored as he watched the battle between Zhuan and Sun Qi and casually asked Bloodscale. Bloodscale's pupils shrank. He looked at the green-haired mummy with vigilance and said coldly, "Who are you? How can you sense the aura on my body?" Bloodscale was shocked. He had completely restrained the aura on his body. Even a second-step Tao-confirming realm cultivator could not see his true identity. However, the green-haired mummy in front of him could see his true identity at a glance. It meant that this mummy was not simple. You are not qualified to know who I am. Even the ancestor of your devouring clan is like a fart in front of me. Only the 12 ancestors of sorcery can enter my eyes. I have seen the birth of the 12 ancestors of sorcery and then fall. The green-haired mummy snorted coldly. Bloodscale was a little disdainful, but he did not refute. He thought that the green-haired mummy was bragging. The 12 ancestors of sorcery were experts respected by all races in the ancient desolate heaven realm. They were the real kings of all races. Moreover, the 12 ancestors of sorcery had fallen for countless years and had become an ancient legend. This green-haired mummy really knew how to brag. He had seen the birth of the 12 ancestors of sorcery and then fall. Didn't that mean that this mummy was even older than the 12 ancestors of sorcery? Bloodscale naturally did not believe it. Although he could not see through the mummy's aura, it was not enough to give him a strong sense of crisis. Obviously, the mummy's strength was not much stronger than his. The mummy's strength was not even comparable to a finger of the 12 ancestors of sorcery. How could it be compared with the 12 ancestors of sorcery? Are you saying that you are stronger than the 12 ancestors of sorcery? Bloodscale said disdainfully. Of course. If I hadn't been trapped, I would have gone out and defeated the 12 ancestral sorcerers at that time. Unfortunately, I could only witness the rise of the 12 ancestral sorcerers. But I'm sure that the 12 ancestral sorcerers would be courting death if they competed with me in terms of physical strength, said the green-haired mummy. Bloodscale shrugged and said no more. The mummy knew that Bloodscale did not believe him, but he did not care. Yawning, he looked at Zhuowen, who was suppressed by Sun Qi, and said, "You are that boy's servant, aren't you? Your master has been beaten so badly. Why don't you go and help him?" Bloodscale shook his head and said, "Zhuowen's strength is not limited to this. He has been fighting with the original body of the human clan, and his strongest is the clone of the Devourer King. If he uses the clone of the Devourer King, Sun Qi may not be his match." The mummy nodded. He had seen Zhuowen's clone of the Devourer King, and he also knew that this human clone of the human clan had practiced the Pangu sacred body. He knew that it would be easy for this boy to deal with Sun Qi. However, this boy had not shown his clone. Obviously, he had his own plan. Boom! Lun was sent flying by a punch. Sun Qi grinned and looked at Zhuowen as if he was looking at a dead man. "Next time when you are reincarnated, remember not to be too arrogant." As Sun Qi spoke, he quickly approached Zhuowen. His right fist, which was ready to strike, blasted toward Zhuowen like a furious dragon. Sun Qi was forced to retreat again and again, and the injuries in his body were getting more and more serious. "I can't continue to be entangled with this person. I have to leave as soon as possible. Otherwise, I may really be left here by this guy." Sun Qi knew that things were not going well. He regretted underestimating Zhuowen. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been forced into such a state by Zhuowen. Thinking of this, Sun Qi took out a disc array. He immediately bit the tip of his tongue and spat out a mouthful of essence blood on the disc array. Suddenly, complex patterns appeared on the surface of the disc array. Then, a blazing blue light burst out from the disc array. Then, dense blue chains emerged from the blue light. Every single blue chain was over 3 meters thick, and the surface of the chain was engraved with dense inscriptions that he could not understand. These inscriptions radiated with mysterious energy. The blue chains swept out at an extremely fast speed. In an instant, Zhuowen's sky, ground, front, back, left, and right were all sealed. Moreover, these blue chains didn't seem to be inanimate objects. Every time Zhuowen tried to escape through a gap between the chains, a thicker chain would suddenly emerge from the gap and attack Zhuowen through the gap. Moreover, these blue chains were extremely sturdy. Zhuowen could only see some marks on the surface of the chains when he used the death sacrifice sword. As for his clone, it was even more helpless when it encountered these chains. After all, when the clone's physical body, which he was most proud of, hit the chains, these chains completely neutralized the clone's strength in a soft way. It didn't make much progress at all. It's useless. This is a Heavenly Dao formation heavenly lock. Even if a Heavenly Dao expert is trapped in this heavenly lock, they won't be able to break free for a while, let alone you. Sun Qi stood outside the heavenly lock. His face was already pale and bloodless. He looked at Zhuowen with great fear and said coldly. Sun Qi had expended a great deal of energy. First, Zhuowen's sneak attack had injured his foundation. Then, Zhuowen's main body and doppelganger had joined forces to pin him down, causing his injuries to worsen. Right now, Sun Qi was probably only able to display a third of his combat strength. I've underestimated you this time. You can actually injure me so badly. Your clone clearly doesn't have any Taoist rhyme aura. How can it have such powerful strength? Sun Qi looked at Zhuowen inside the heavenly lock. He was extremely curious about the clone beside Zhuowen. When this clone was fighting, it didn't reveal any Taoist rhyme aura from beginning to end, but its strength was surprisingly terrifying. Zhuowen frowned slightly and looked at the blue chains around him. These blue chains were too sturdy. Zhuowen couldn't break free at all. Not only did you make me waste a Heavenly Dao divine pill, but you also forced me to take out a Heavenly Dao formation. You deserve to die today. Sun Qi was flustered and exasperated. Whether it was the divine pill that he fed Sakyamuni or the formation that he took out now, they were the only precious things he had on him. Now, in order to deal with a death enlightenment state cultivator, he had used them all. This was definitely a great loss for Sun Qi. If the other disciples of Bai Hong Hall knew about this, Sun Qi would definitely be ridiculed. Thinking of this, Sun Qi's killing intent towards Zhuowen became even more intense. Explode! Sun Qi's hands formed a seal. His eyes were ferocious. Immediately, the blue chains in the heavenly lock began to expand. A vast and powerful aura was constantly emerging from the blue chains. Boom! When the blue chains expanded to the extreme, they burst out with a dazzling brilliance. The terrifying energy swept through everything as if it was going to destroy the world. Zhuowen's figure was completely engulfed by the terrifying explosive energy. His figure could no longer be seen. Chapter 2630. Universal Teleportation Talisman, Senior Brother's Son. Help me catch up to Mu Chenxue and the others. I want them all dead. Only then can I vent the hatred in my heart, Sakyamuni said coldly. Sun Qi frowned slightly and nodded. He did not particularly care about Yao Xiangjuan and the others, but he was a little concerned about Mu Chenxue. He knew that someone in the human race who could awaken the Phoenix bloodline must have something to do with the four Shangzhen. If necessary, Sun Qi did indeed plan to capture Mu Chenxue alive and bring her back to the Xianmi sky region. The moment Sun Qi helped Sakyamuni up, a sound pierced through the air. Before Sun Qi could react, the sound pierced through his chest. The powerful force directly sent Sun Qi flying, and blood spurted out like a fountain. Sakyamuni, who had been helped up, was also sent flying in a sorry state. At this moment, Sakura didn't even understand what was going on. He just realized that in the direction of the heavenly lock, where the explosion had occurred, a figure suddenly rushed out. He would never forget this figure. It was Zhuowen. This guy. Why isn't he dead? Sakyamuni only had time to think this. He saw Zhuowen clench his fist, and a purple sword appeared in his hand. In an instant he brushed past Sakyamuni. Then, Sakyamuni's head flew into the air, and Zhuowen caught it in his hand. At the same time, Zhuowen's momentum did not decrease. He rushed towards Sun Qi, who was flying backward. He planned to kill Sun Qi as well. Sun Qi's pupils shrank as he felt a great sense of danger. He immediately flicked his finger and took out a talisman from his spirit ring. This talisman was his most precious treasure. It was called the Universal Teleportation Talisman. Within 10 breaths of time after crushing this talisman, his speed could surpass the speed of light. Sun Qi's eyes showed a hint of pain. Then he suddenly crushed the Universal Teleportation Talisman. His body was then wrapped in a gentle light, and he disappeared. Before Zhuowen could react, Sun Qi had already appeared beside the headless Sakyamuni. Then, with a flash of light, Sun Qi disappeared. Even if Zhuowen used his divine sense to lock onto Sun Qi, he found that he had completely lost track of Sun Qi after 2 breaths. Now, Zhuowen's divine sense was definitely more powerful than that of the heavenly Tao Master. Under the effect of the Panga banner, his divine soul was constantly strengthening and expanding. Just now, the distance that Zhuowen could radiate was enough to cross an entire heaven domain. However, Sun Qi had escaped from Zhuowen's divine sense in 2 breaths of time. This meant that Sun Qi had crossed an entire heaven domain in 2 breaths of time. What a terrifying speed! Sun Qi is indeed an expert from the Xianmi heaven domain. Although he is only the heavenly Tao Master, he has so many trump cards. Zhuowen muttered in a low voice. Chapter 2631. Ho-E Divine Arrow. Zhuowen felt a little helpless. This green-haired mummy definitely had an extraordinary origin, and it was suppressed by the Panga banner. It must have something to do with Pangu, but this mummy just refused to admit it. Zhuowen still did not understand why this green-haired mummy wanted to follow him. With its strength, even in the Xianmi heavenly domain, it was probably a top expert. It was strong enough to stand firm in the Xianmi heavenly domain. Kid, your blood-stained horn is not simple. I will teach you a chant. You can use this chant to control the blood-stained horn, the green-haired mummy suddenly said. Zhuowen was stunned and took out the blood-stained horn. Speaking of which, he had obtained the cultivation method of the Pangu's sacred body from this blood-stained horn. He had only used it as a jade slip to record information. He had never thought that it could be a weapon. Seeing Zhuowen's hesitation, the green-haired mummy said lightly, "If you don't trust me, you don't have to learn it." "I will learn it," Zhuowen said lightly. Zhuowen felt that ever since the green-haired mummy knew that the Panga banner had chosen him, it no longer had any hostility towards him. In fact, it even had a sense of closeness. However, Zhuowen wasn't sure why. The green-haired mummy nodded and passed the chant to Zhuowen through his divine will. There were not many words in this chant, but Zhuowen could not understand any of them. He looked at these densely packed words as if he was looking at an astronomical number. However, the green-haired mummy's divine will read all these complicated words to Zhuowen, and it repeated them several times. Although Zhuowen did not know the meaning of these chants, he remembered the pronunciation of the chant and unconsciously recited it. Suddenly, a terrifying murderous intent gushed out from the blood-stained horn. Zhuowen bore the brunt of this murderous intent. When he came in contact with this murderous intent, he groaned and kept retreating. Bloodscale was even worse off. The killing intent sent him flying out of the space-time roulette. He stared at the blood-stained horn in shock. He had never felt such a terrifying killing intent before. It simply made his scalp go numb. Just how many living beings had to be slaughtered to produce such a terrifying killing intent? Zhuowen opened his eyes and looked at the blood-stained horn in front of him. He saw that the blood-stained horn was releasing more and more killing intent, and it was becoming more and more terrifying. Moreover, Zhuowen had an indescribable feeling in his heart. It was as if the killing intent released by the blood-stained horn could be gathered at a certain place according to his will. Thinking of this, Zhuowen directed his killing intent at Bloodscale. Bloodscale felt his scalp go numb as he stared at the blood-stained horn. He could feel the threat of death looming over him. It was as if the blood-stained horn was released, he would die without a doubt. Plop. "Master, please spare me." Bloodscale no longer had the courage to face the blood-stained horn. He actually knelt on the ground and trembled all over. "Quickly put it away." The green-haired mummy snorted coldly and immediately grabbed the blood-stained horn and took it off. Suddenly, the terrifying killing intent disappeared. Bloodscale collapsed on the ground and wiped the cold sweat on his forehead. Zhuowen also collapsed on the ground. He was shocked to find that most of the divine power in his body had been sucked out. His body was full of fatigue. "It seems that it's too early for you to use this thing. If you had continued just now, your divine power would have been completely absorbed by it, and your life would have been in danger." The green-haired mummy muttered. Zhuowen swallowed a few elixirs and slightly recovered his spirit. Only then did he look at the blood-stained horn in the mummy's hand with lingering fear. Zhuowen had never thought that this ordinary blood-stained horn would be so terrifying. That killing intent was definitely the most terrifying killing intent Zhuowen had ever seen. It was actually able to suppress Bloodscale to the point of kneeling and begging for mercy. It could be seen just how terrifying this killing intent was. What the hell is this? Just the killing intent is so terrifying. If it was really used, wouldn't it be even more terrifying? Zhuowen said with lingering fear. "This is an arrow. It was used by Ho-Yi, a powerful figure in the Wizard Age, to kill the three-legged crow. It is called the #1 arrow in the Untainted Land. It is extremely terrifying." The green-haired mummy said indifferently. "It's an arrow?" Zhuowen looked at the blood-stained horn. He really could not tell that it was an arrow. However, the horn was indeed about the length of an ordinary arrow. Moreover, the tip of the horn was dripping with blood. He was afraid that Ho-Yi might have used it to kill the three-legged crow. This arrow is enough to kill many powerful figures. It's a pity that there is only an arrow and no bow. It can't display the grand scene of Ho-Yi killing the three-legged crow. The green-haired mummy said with some regret. Zhuowen rolled his eyes. He could not control the arrow, let alone Ho-Yi's bow. Needless to say, he definitely could not pull it. Even if he found it, it would not be of much use to him now. "Let's go." Zhuowen calmed down and planned to leave. He was still a little worried about Mu Chenxue and the others. After all, he did not completely kill Sun Qi. What if Mu Chenxue and the others came looking for Sun Qi? You're afraid that Sun Chi will find trouble with your friends, aren't you? You're worrying too much. That guy's injuries are very serious, and your wife has the Phoenix bloodline. She's not a simple person. She can't take them down.